How's it going, everybody? Welcome to another episode of the Artisans of Steel podcast. I have a really awesome guest that I'm really excited to talk to get today. He's a maker and a great guy who I've just really admired for a long time. But before we get to him, I'm gonna just blast through and talk about some of our sponsors, or not some of them. I'm gonna talk about our sponsors. The first sponsor, these are all from the Patreon, and if you want to go support the Patreon, where you get to see these conversations recorded live, you get to become part of the conversations, ask these very talented and unique guests various questions about their process or philosophies or whatever you want to ask them about. Be part of the conversation. You can join over on at the Malmasi Fire Arts Patreon at the illuminated individual level. I don't know why I made that such a tongue twister for myself. But anyways, and then yeah, you can be part of these conversations. You can be part of our private Discord, and really we're building a community that's helping each other troubleshoot and build each other up and really figure out this path in knife making. And it's been good. It's been really good. We're on 2 solid years now, and it's we're going strong. So our first sponsor today is Mr. Dan Hubbs of 66 Mountain Knives. He's on Instagram and Facebook at 66. Those are the numbers. 66 Mountain Knives. He's doing some really great Damascus stuff. Honestly, you got to go give him a follow to see what he's doing, because it is exemplary work, and it's clean and very creative and very interesting looking. And he makes these great EDCs. And yeah, he's also a great guy. He took one of my classes, which is part of why he's like definitely taking his Damascus to another level. And yeah, he's doing an awesome job. So go follow him. He's Dan Hubbs at 66 Mountain Knives. Next up, we have Mr. Lawrence Lake of Maritime Knife Supply. Lawrence is another great guy. He's based out of Atlantic, Canada, and he provides supplies, hence the name Maritime Knife Supply, for any of your knife making needs. And if he doesn't already carry it, he's a great guy to reach out to try to get a hold of. He obviously, because he's in Atlantic, Canada, he is a great resource for knife makers over in Canada, but also in the United States. He's got great shipping rates, and can get your stuff to you quick, lickety split. Actually, anything from tools, handle materials, anything really that you need for knife making. Again, if you can't find it there, he can help source it and get it to you. And he sends out great candy with his orders, and he just loaded up on a bunch of stuff. But he's just got a bunch of new handle material in, and steel. And so whatever you need, go check him out. His knife bags, actually, I need to go get some of the knife bags that he sells, because they are really nice. And um and uh, and they come with like a leather patch, so you can get them laser engraved with your own maker's mark, or whatever you want on there, or even like maybe the customer's name or whatever. On the bag. So anyways, go check him out. Great stuff. All right, next up we have Gabe Fletcher. He is Anchorage Brewing on Instagram, as well as at Anchorage Forge. He is a newer maker. I think he's been making knives for almost 2 years now, or maybe a little. I don't know. His anniversary is coming up pretty soon. His knife making path, and he's doing phenomenal work at this point already. I've been very fortunate to work with him, and he's just blowing up the scene. And he also, hence the Anchorage Brewing, he's a great brewer. And I've tasted a bunch of his beers, and I haven't had a single one that was bad. And he actually has another beer collaboration actually coming out with Ben Camon. He's an Austrian knife maker who was actually he was the last one of the last couple. My brain's not working very well right. One of the last couple guests that I had here on the podcast, and we had a great conversation. And Gabe has been working with him for a little while, in doing this beer collaboration. Actually, Gabe also just did his own personal take on Ben's monolith style knife, which is really cool and came out really nicely. And he's got it posted on his Instagram, so make sure you go give him a follow and a look to see what he's doing, because he's worth the time and effort. Next up, we have Mr. Eric Kidwell. He's on Instagram at District 202 LLC. He's still in the process of getting his shop put together and set up, but I'm excited to be seeing him. I'm going to actually be seeing him down in Arizona next month, I think it's St. Patrick's Day weekend. I'll be down there demoing, and he is the point man at that hammer-in where he's running around with a camera. Because not only do they do kind of a standard presentation where people are standing up and talking about stuff, but they, especially when it comes to the grinding portions, it's hard to see what the maker's actually doing between their body and the grinding plat or the grinder. And so he gets in there with the camera, and then that gets projected to a secondary screen where you can watch and actually see the details of what the person is talking about. He's also, he's basically the point man on all the audio video. So I'm excited to see him again. He's a great guy, and it'll be fun to be hanging out with him again. Again, go follow him on Instagram at District202LLC. And then next, we have Josh A. Weston. He's Josh Weston, better known as Josh Weston. And he's on the Instagram at Josh A. Weston, as well as at Dragon Forge EXP for the Dragon Forge experience. And right now, they're actually down in Arizona, in Phoenix, doing the Phoenix Renaissance Festival. And they have fabricated these incredible dragons, dragon forges. And so they've built these forges, and then around the forges, they've fabricated these really elaborate dragons. And recently, they've started doing a lot more work with like high temperature castable refractory that really takes the texture and the aesthetic of the dragons to another level. They're super rad. And actually, my kid is obsessed with dragons and Lego building, and he built a Lego dragon based off of one of the dragons that they built, and it was pretty rad. It's really good. And he gave it to me as a gift because I was like, wow, that's so good. I liked it so much. He's like, Daddy, I want you to have this. So it was pretty sweet. And we appreciate Josh for his inspiration. So again, go check him out on Instagram at Josh A. Weston, as well as at Dragon Forge EXP. Last but not least, we have Russell Tinsley of Oozle Finch Beers. That's OOZLE Finch Beers. He's the founder of Oozle Finch. He's also, his maker page is Can't Make Knives, and he's another great guy. He's getting into knife making over the last, last couple of years, couple and a half years. He's taken some classes at the New England School of Metalwork. He's probably going to have to change his Instagram handle soon from Can't Make Knives to Makes Great Knives. But he also at Oozle Finch Beers, they make a lot of really great beers and a lot of kind of I don't know if novelty is even the right word, but they do all these creative and out of the box flavors and styles of beers. I think a while ago they had a lemon bar beer, and then I think I also had like a peanut butter chocolate beer from them one time, and they're all like, it's nothing I ever would have thought would have been uh a kind of beer ever. But you taste them and you drink them, and they're really great, and they're really creatively made. And yeah, so go check them out. Oozle Finch Beers, as well as at Can't Make Knives. All right, and so without further ado, I want to introduce my friend Andy Billipp. Pull him in here real quick. Andy, I've been an admirer of your work for a very long time. I think I first discovered your stuff when I was first starting out on my own back in, gosh, it was like 2012 or so, maybe 2013, through the kitchen knife forums. Because as a new maker, I didn't know where to it basically interact and engage not with potential customers. And I learned about the kitchen knife forum, and you were definitely one of the guys that was on there doing some really great work. And what I really love and admire about your work is how you found this really great balance of this brute forge kind of rough aesthetic and rough forged aesthetic, and look to your knives with like beautifully and really nicely refined blades and handle sculpting, and then you still continue to innovate on your own style, incorporating some of again more of that brute forge blacksmith aesthetic in your blades with the handle materials. And it's been really great to get to know you. We unfortunately, when I lived in Connecticut, we only met up like maybe once or twice, even though we're
Yeah.
only like 40 minutes away from each other. We weren't even that
Yeah, I
far
think we
from each
both got pretty busy in that time. But
Yeah,
yeah, I mean, first of all, thank you so much for having me on here. This is really cool. I mean,
absolutely.
I listen to the show, and
Okay.
and knife talk, and so like to get to participate as well as just listen is great. That's
Well,
seems really fun.
and the reason I wanna have you on here is because 1, I want more people to know who you are, but I've really admired and appreciated your style and approach for a very long time, and I think, and coming from such a varied background, like you're a farmer, homesteader, you're a skater, you're an archer, outdoor hunter, and fisherman, you have all these a carpenter, you have all these various, kinda aspects to you that I think and facets to you that a lot of people, I think when they think about knife makers, they're like, that must be all they do. It's just knife making all day long. And it's like, no, we do all kinds of stuff. And so it's cool to introduce other people who are very multifaceted, but how, and try to like, but to get your story and try to better understand like how you reincorporate that into your world, into your knives, the style of knives you make, and how that informs the way the blades are ground and the way the handles feel and all of that
Yeah,
stuff.
yeah, yeah. Thanks, man. That's high. That's high praise. Coming from you. Um, yeah, I feel like that sort of inflates my resume a little bit. To say all those things.
Nah, man,
I've
it's real
dabbled in a
though.
lot of stuff. Like, I don't know. Like, I don't know. It's hard to say why we really like the things we like, or I always feel like the things that I do, like they like do me as much as
Oh,
I do
sure.
that. Like it's just like I just things grab onto me, and then I'm just like, this is what I do now. Like and I just
Right.
get like obsessed with it, and I think that more than anything else, like the knife stuff, I've stayed with because it's also it's like it's part of my job. So
Right.
that's kept me in it longer maybe than it would have, like, for like a little while right before the pandemic. I just started playing ice hockey, like
Oh,
for
really?
no reason. Like my kids got ice skates, and then so I had ice skates, and I was like, this is really fun. I want to go play hockey. And then I played hockey super hard for like a month, like pickup hockey, like no experience, just like
For sure.
bought pads from somebody on Craigslist, and then like stepped onto a hockey rink being like, what the hell am I doing here? And then just like you kind of forgot about that later. But I mean, I think that having it be like that knife making is my job, keeps me in it. And then so you kind of it's like one part inspiration, and then the rest of it is just like doing the work, right?
Yeah, well, and I think it's really important, honestly, just as humans in general, we should be doing this, kind of dabbling and experimenting and trying new things wherever we get on or inspiration or opportunities, because I think too often in our current kind of state of the world, we're often told like, this is your lane, this is how to be successful, this is
Right.
how you make money to make a living and survive and take care of people, either your own family or yourself. And a lot of people get pigeonholed, and really like success looks like many so many different things, and it means it means very different things to everybody. And so it doesn't necessarily mean tons of money. Maybe it means just like be, being able to work a job where you have all the freedom and extra time that you need to spend with your family, because that's what you really value versus whatever else other people might find
Yeah, for
and
sure.
define for as success for themselves. And I think, again, I think it's just so important that people experiment and to try to discover that for themselves, because you just don't know what it is. And I think we all have our own kind of, we have our own personal genius somewhere hidden inside of us, but the only way you find that is by these little experiments and dabbling until you finally something really strikes a chord and connects with you. And maybe it's a
Yeah.
few things, maybe it's one thing, maybe it's a few things, but and then those are the things that you really hone in and dig in on to really deepen your understanding and technique and skill and ability to do. And then you turn around and then you do that initially kind of like for yourself, but then it becomes a thing that you can turn around and share with the world. Through our knife making, we do that. Musicians do it with their songs and their
Right.
music. Painters do it with their visual art. Builders do it with their designs and construction and like all these really cool and crazy technique. Like there are lots of different ways for that personal genius to manifest to then turn around and reflect back out into the world in a valuable and meaningful way. So I
Yeah,
think it's cool that you did that. You've given yourself permission to be okay doing that, which is also the challenging part about doing all that experimentation is also like or at least for me, is the, trying to be okay making mistakes and not being good at stuff. And that's like, I think that's one of the biggest thing is that holds people back from doing that kind of work
Yeah,
is the
definitely.
fear of not being good or making mistakes. But like,
Yeah.
how else do you start?
Well,
You
for
don't come
sure.
out of the
Yeah.
womb knowing how to walk or ride a bike, right?
For sure. I think that all the things that I've ever gotten interested in, like I've showed or felt some sort of like aptitude for. So
Sure.
like the all the things, like, I think that like things that are physical make sense to me, like
Yeah.
sports stuff, uh balance related things, like, skateboarding since forever, like, so things like that are sort of easy for me to pick up.
Hmm.
Like, one example where I've like completely failed in this respect is like music. I love music. Like, it's the
Okay.
only thing that's a big part of my life that I don't participate in at
Okay.
all. Like,
Sure.
creatively, nothing. Like, I have owned a guitar like my entire life, and every like 3 years I pick it up and I get it restrung, and I'm like, I'm gonna do it this time. And it's just
Yeah.
like playing those four chords is like not fun to me. It's like the
Hmm.
the, the initial stages aren't enjoyable, so I never
Sure.
get past it. Like, I'm never like, I just can't wait to go pick up that guitar.
Yeah.
But like, I don't know. Like, I mean, it's how it was starting out with knife making for me, where I was like, all I could think about was like, oh, I want to make the next one. Like, I want to make a good hunting knife for the, you know,
Yeah.
I want to dig deep on, what makes a good kitchen knife, and then like I'd just be up at night thinking about that, just like couldn't wait
Right.
to go do that. And like, I don't even, I almost feel like it's like the things that I like to do, like I don't even have a choice, you know.
I gotcha.
It
Yeah.
feels that way.
Well, and I think that's part. I've had this conversation with people, or sometimes even like with like I'm an uncle, I'm a father, so talking with kids about this kind of stuff and
Right.
kind of like not in too heavy of a way, but just being like, it's it's part of the joy of life is the experimentation and discovery, right?
Yeah.
And I think, and the question that comes up is like, well, how do I know that this is the thing versus something else? And it's like you were just saying, it's like when you find something that you're willing to continue to fail at, but keep doing, I think is where versus like you're saying about the guitar, like you pick it up, you try it for a little bit, and you're just like, yeah, you're like there, that the enjoyment and the struggle isn't there. But when you can find enjoyment in the struggle and whatever process,
Yeah.
that's
And
when
then
it's
like
like
in the
that's where
in the
that bulb is like, that might be one of those things that I'm like actually really interested
yeah,
in.
the tiny
Like,
little bits of improvement that you
right,
can, that you can feel in that, in each of those sessions or something like that. And if like that's satisfying, then that keeps you going. Like, yeah, it's got to have that, or it's not happening.
right, for sure. Well, we really just kind of like hit the ground running, kind of. I want to take a step back and just kind of get a better, because a part of this podcast is kind of a selfish opportunity for me to get to know you. Oops, I just punched the microphone. Get to know you better. And I don't know much about your background. And I know that you live in Connecticut, but I don't know I can't remember if you grew up there and then what your childhood was like. We've talked about you skating and hunting a little, touched on those things. And are those things you did growing up? What was kind of like birth to like the end of high school? What did that kind of look like for
A
you?
birth to end of high school. Well, I was born in New York,
Okay.
like in Stuyvesant Town, New York, and then my parents, at the sort of like, you know, age of my sister and I were, when we were little kids, they moved us to like out of the city, and we went to Massachusetts, and we lived in a couple of towns in Massachusetts. I grew up in Billerica, and then we moved to Lexington, and then I went to high school there, and went to college at UMass Amherst,
Okay.
and then I feel like I skipped a lot, but I went to the Waldorf school before high school, and
Okay.
that is your son in the Waldorf school?
My kid does go to Waldorf. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Okay.
he loves it. We love it. We really enjoy it.
Yeah. I had, for a period there, I'd gone to a public school in Billerica, Mass, and I appreciated. Like, and then we like came back to the Waldorf school, and I
Mhm.
really appreciated even as a little kid. And like I'd never had a good time at school
Okay.
and never enjoyed school. It always just felt like prison to me. But
Okay.
even within that, like I understood that the Waldorf school is special because people were just nice there. Like
Right.
I was when we left there, I'd been to like kindergarten, nursery school. I mean, little kid, and then we went to this like public school. Like kids were getting beat up and stuff like that. I never saw anything like that at the Waldorf
Right.
school, you know,
No.
and and uh, and that was just like shocking, you know. So like you know that community there is like you know, for people who aren't familiar with the Waldorf school, it's like uh, it's they're like small private schools. There's a lot of creative art stuff in it. There's a lot of like um, there's a lot of singing performance stuff. Everyone has to play the recorder, just kind of brutal.
Yeah, my kid's doing
Um,
that right now.
okay, right on. Does he play with beeswax a lot?
Yes, lots of
Yes,
beeswax.
beeswax is big in the Waldorf school. But I
Yeah,
mean, basically, like I feel like it kind of boils down to like creates kind of like a small town experience because like I
yeah,
mean, in my eighth grade class, I think there were like 9 to 12 kids. So it's really
sure.
small, you know, and you just
Super small.
you know, yeah, exactly. And the community is really small and people are kind of like minded. But mostly just like people were nice, like adults were kind, you know. You weren't just like getting yelled at for everything. You
Right.
know, we did later because I was horrible, but I drove like two teachers into like either a sabbatical or early retirement. I mean, I was
Crazy
not
house.
just me, but like it was definitely a part of it. Yeah,
I gotcha.
but yeah, and then I went to college at UMass Amherst and um, started started working out west when I was in the summer times working on guest ranches. So doing
Oh,
like horseback trips, that kind of stuff. Was really into that for a while, and that exposed me to like Western rural culture, which
so you're
is
from Connecticut and the East Coast, so what does out west mean? Does that mean, like, Indiana or all the way over to
no,
California?
no. I mean like the American West. So
Okay,
I was in Wyoming, Montana.
okay.
Um, just really influential. Like the people that I met out there, you know, like out doing ranch work, you know, what
Yeah,
we'd call cowboys, like getting to
sure.
do that work, beating around horses all day, you know. Um, that was that was really formative. It's
Mhm,
hard to say exactly why, but just like I mean, the United States is so big and so varied. Like, if we all didn't speak the same language, it would just be like the same as Europe, you know, where you really
right.
see different countries and different cultures. But like how people live out there, you know, what their sort of like worldview is, what's important to them. It's I mean, a lot of things are, you know, the same, obviously. They're sort of universal, but like
Mhm,
that was fascinating to me as like an East Coast kid to go spend time with these people. And a
right.
lot of the people that that I knew out there were so like multi-talented.
Mm,
So many
sure.
everyone out there, like people who work on a ranch are like, you know, if they've grown up doing that, there's sort of this like renaissance man of different
Mm,
skills. Like, cause like people out there, you gotta like you're on a well, like, well, you gotta know all about your well pump. Like that goes out. You like people are just like involved in their lives in a
mhm,
like you know, kind of like driving like a standard car instead of an automatic, you know. It's
sure.
like that level of just like hands on with stuff. And they seem like they could just do everything. Like they
Mhm,
could make stuff, they could fix anything, you know, your car's broken down. Oh, no problem. We'll fix that, you know, like, and so that was really inspiring. Like I kind of took from that like, oh man, I need to like get it together because like I don't know how to do
I see.
anything, you know.
Oh, alright.
Like you know, it's like people who are so like talented, they could like fix anything, train dogs, train horses, hunt, like do all that, and then also come home and like play like classical guitar and like just blow your mind with the amount of like skill and ability, you know, in all these different places. And I was like, man, like I gotta like I'm thinking to myself like in this sort of self-defensive way, like, oh, like I can kickflip, like maybe you know, maybe they can't do that. Like
Sure. But
so
there it
lame.
sounds like there's, like, this self-sustaining element that they were capable of that you really admired.
Yeah, certainly. And there was just like, I got I'm sort of working around to like how I got started in craft stuff, but like I always enjoyed
Mhm.
making things, and there's a lot of like leather work that is involved in just ranch stuff around horses. There's fixing
Right,
tack, like everything's made out of leather. You got to like know how to put stuff together and everything.
right.
And um some of the folks who worked there, like part of the family who ran one of these ranches. This was the Sweetgrass Ranch in Melville, Montana, out in the Crazy Mountains.
Okay.
Really cool family. They'd been out there like since for generations. And kind of way out what we think of as like the middle of nowhere, like miles of dirt road off of like a gravel road.
Okay.
And they had a saddle shop in their basement of this house. So like they just invited us, like the guys who were working there, me and a few other people, to like come down and work on some projects. So I made a pair of they're called chinks. They're like short chaps. So like
Okay.
which are popular for like not working cattle so much as just like being horseback every day.
Okay.
So I was like able to use their shop there, and they had all the tools, like all on the walls, everything organized. They had like a Titman Boss sewing, heavy duty leather sewing machine,
Oh,
because the
wow.
guy made saddles. And that was really inspiring. I was like, I need this in my life. I need to have like a shop, like the little bat
Mhm.
cave where you go down there and you just like
Yeah.
make stuff.
Yeah.
um yeah, so and then when I was done with school, I moved out to Colorado. I was rock climbing a lot at the time, and I
Okay.
knew a couple of people who lived out in Boulder,
Okay.
and so I went out there, and that's where I got started knife making.
Oh, really? And when was that? What year?
That would have been, so I moved out there 2008,
Okay.
and um, that was just such a cool time. Like it was kind of a wild time. There was like the recession happened, like that,
Right.
everything kind of like,
The housing market took a shit and
yeah,
all
everything
that. Yeah.
everything shit the bed like right when we moved out there. So like it was this funny time where it was like, okay, we're like done with school and like entering the workforce, and like
Mhm.
everything is going to shit. But my plan was basically to like live out of my car and like rock climb a bunch. So like that went kind of way over my head. Like it didn't matter at all. I had no like
Sure.
investments or anything. But I ended up working at this place called Resource, which was it was like a used building materials
Yeah.
yard, kind of like a
Like
salvage
Habitat.
yard. Yeah,
We
they
have,
have something similar there.
yeah, I've that's what I'm most familiar with. Habitat for Humanity has a what is it called? The Restore. And so
Right. Yeah.
what they'll do is they'll offer to help with demos, and then they'll try to sustainably collect as much of the materials as they can, and then they put it back into the store, and all that counts as like a write-off for whoever's having the work done, and then they can turn around and sell that stuff back out,
Yeah, yeah,
the
it was the
salvaged
same.
building
This was the
materials.
same kind of program. It wasn't through Habitat for Humanity. It was like through the Center for Resource Conservation, which was
Okay.
like worked with the city of Boulder. But like,
Yeah. Cool.
anyway, so we just like worked in this place. We took donations, and like all kinds of stuff would come through here, because
Mhm.
like you do, people demoing houses have to like divert a certain amount of material from the landfill. So we'd get like
Oh,
bricks and
okay.
two by fours and stuff, shingles. But then we'd also get, when someone cleaned out like their father-in-law's garage or something, we got all that stuff.
Oh, wow.
And so I was able to set up like um a janky knife shop on like the balcony of my apartment with just stuff I got from there.
On the
Like
balcony.
yeah.
Okay.
And
Were
like,
you running coal or a propane forge or
no, this was pre-forged, so like,
Okay,
this
so
is
stock
really,
removal.
really early stuff. Yeah, and it was
Yeah.
all like garbage. So like actually it was like like old circular saw blades, lawnmower blades, that kind of
I
stuff.
gotcha.
Like you remember, the book, I think it's the $50 Knife Shop,
Yes.
the
By,
Wayne Goddard, right?
Wayne Goddard, yep.
Yeah, yeah, that was like, I got that, and then just like went to town. I bought like, the first tool I ever bought was a Dremel tool,
Okay.
just like a little handheld,
Yeah,
and so I was out there making sparks, like,
for sure.
yeah, yeah. Um, and then I kind of stayed with that, and then I got interested in forging, so I wanted to put all that stuff together. And I'm like, I got like no money for
Right,
shop
sure.
equipment. But it was this like really kind of cool time when like I was kind of operating under this philosophy that like if you're just kind of open and you present yourself as open, then
Mm,
like things will like manifest. They'll like come to
yeah.
you, you know.
Opportunities arrive. Yeah.
Yeah. And one day a guy was throwing like a bunch of metal, scrap metal in our metal dumpster. And I just went out and like was talking to him for some reason. He had some car springs. So I was like, "Oh, like mind if I grab one of those? Cause yeah, I want to use it for smithing." And he was like, "Oh, what's your setup or whatever?" And then we were talking. This guy, turns out he had a forge, an anvil, all that kind of stuff. And he was like, "I'll give it to you for like $100. Come on up to my place and get it this
Wow.
afternoon." And like that was the guy. Like I needed that guy to come in and like,
Right.
and he came in. And just
Yeah.
because I was like
Wow.
open to it. And I still have that forge now. It's like one of those like North, like the Carolina forge
Oh,
little
yeah,
ones,
sure.
like for horseshoes. But yeah, I used that and I started just banging away at stuff and doing terrible, janky heat treating and all that stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that was the start. That was like so that'd have been like 2008 to 2011 when we moved back to Connecticut here.
I got you. So to back up just real quick, because we kind of jumped into you making knives. Like, what was at what point or what thing or what happened that made you say, I want to understand this better, or I want to learn how to make these so that I can either just again be maybe part of that self-sustaining aspect, or that you thought maybe somewhere down the road it might be something that you could turn around and sell.
Um, I mean, the reason I kind of went with knives is just because I've always liked knives a lot.
Okay.
Just always as a kid, I've always had knives around,
Hmm.
and I was kind of looking like at that time when I was done with school, I was just like looking for something to kind of pour myself into.
Okay.
And I'd been really inspired by the ability that people had and that I'd been working with to just like make things. Like
Hmm.
you could just make a full saddle like that didn't exist
Sure.
before. That
You mean
was
that doesn't just
really
pop into
cool.
existence?
Yeah. um yeah, and then I had met my wife when we first started dating. Like she'd studied green woodworking in Sweden. So like traditional
Oh, wow.
Swedish woodcraft is like you take like a saw and you walk out into the woods and you find a big, a tree that's the right shape for something you want to make, and you cut that section of the tree out or down or a branch or
Okay.
whatever, and then you take an axe and you like make it into the rough shape of a spoon or something, and then you draw a knife it,
Right.
and then like finish carve it. So there's like no sanding or anything. It's like very clean. She had a small shop in the bottom of her house, and I
Mhm.
walked into that and I was like, oh yes, like I need this for me, whatever that is.
I gotcha.
And I liked knives, and she had actually done a little bit of that work like when she was in Sweden, some blacksmithing stuff. So she was
Okay.
like, yeah, like you should make knives. Go for that. That'd be cool. And I was like, let's go. So I got that Dremel tool.
Nice.
Yeah.
Crazy. Okay, so at this point, you and your wife, or I guess I don't know if you were married at that point, but you guys moved back to Connecticut. What
Yeah.
what brings you back to Connecticut?
So my wife's family has had this farm. It's the Eddy Farm in Newington, and it's been in her family for like generations, long
Mhm.
time. Um, and it belonged at the time to her mom, who's since passed away, but she had
Mm,
inherited it from my wife's grandparents.
mhm.
Um, and there was like a series of sort of caretakers and tenants, and it's 60 acres, it's a bunch of buildings, it's like a lot to take care of, and
Right.
they kind of they were hoping somebody in the family would take it over, and it was kind of falling into disrepair, and the people who were the tenants were like they were older and not really able to keep up on all the maintenance and stuff. So
Sure.
she was like, I either need someone from the family to take it over, or we need to find like a young, long term like tenant for this place.
Mhm.
And so they came out and visited us when we were in Colorado, and we had this like cool little house and this cool shop, and it was just we
Yeah.
were just like living the dream out there.
Right.
And they basically like pitched it to us to come take over the farm. They're like, we'll set you up here, and there's a lot of fixing that needs to happen, but there's like a business at this place. It's ready to go. Like
Oh, okay.
there's been a farm stand. Like we're a farm that's not in the country. We're in the middle of town. Like we're the
Okay.
only farm left out of what used to be a ton of farmland. So like I have a golf course on one side of me and like houses all around.
Oh, wow.
And we
Okay.
have a farm stand on like it's like a state highway. It's one of the busiest roads in town. And it's
Mhm.
been there for like, I don't know, 60 years or something. So
Holy
like
smokes.
people are expecting it to open and we sell sweet corn and vegetables and fruit and stuff like that.
Mhm.
Um so there was a job there, you know. It was like you come here, you run the farm, you can live here, and then you run, you know, this business. And so they kind of set us up doing that. And for the first couple of years here, we like tried to do everything. You know, I think that's like a new farmer thing.
And that was
Um,
and sorry, you guys moved back there in 2011, is that
yeah,
what you said? Okay.
2011, yeah.
Alright.
And so I mean, we were growing all kinds of vegetables, and we had like pastured pigs, pastured
Mhm.
poultry. We're doing the whole Joel Salatin like rotational grazing
Okay.
stuff. And it was like we just like worked ourselves to death. I mean, we were like young, no kids at the time, you know, and
Right.
that's what you do, you know, you just like you try everything.
Yeah.
And eventually we kind of figure out like what works for us. They say you're a new farmer for 10 years.
Okay.
Um
Wow.
yeah, which is exactly how long it's taken me to like stop growing myself. Like
Okay.
yeah, so the farm stand that we run now is like a retail operation. So I have relationships with other local farms, which are
Mhm.
always buying and selling stuff to each other because nobody has everything all the
Oh, I
time,
got
you
you.
know.
Sure.
Yeah, so like in the summertime when the farm stand is open, that's my job is I run that, and you know
Mhm.
I'm running around picking up produce. So we basically buy and sell produce like that. My wife now does all the growing on the farm, and it's strictly flowers. So
Okay.
she runs like a wholesale cut flower operation here.
Okay.
So we've sort of like we were doing all this stuff together and we sort of diverged. So I do, you know, seasonally I do the farm stand stuff, and I, you know, help out here and there
Mhm.
with the flower side of things, but mostly like farm work wise, I'm more of like property maintenance. Like,
I
you
see.
know, there's 60 acres here, there's a bunch of
Yeah.
woods, there's a bunch of pasture, there's like, you know, everything's falling apart all the time. So it's like, so mostly I'm just like, I'm doing that kind of work and not strictly like, you know, growing or agricultural stuff. But
Sure.
it is nice because like the you know it's a good business there, and it does well. So like you know it takes the burden of earning off of knife making, which
Yeah.
then also takes the burden of earning off of that. So that can stay like a small, like it's a kind of a small, quiet business, very quaint. It's like looks really nice. It's basically like a shed with two wagons there, you know,
Okay.
just like what you'd kind of imagine like local agriculture should look like, you know.
Sure.
It's a nice place to go. People have been going there forever.
Yeah.
Um and but I don't feel like I need to grow that into some big like attraction or anything like that. It's like, you know, having the two different, you know,
You don't
aspects
wanna turn it
of
into
my
lime and
work.
orchards?
Well, exactly. Exactly. I mean, we kind of started. We tried some of that. We did like pick your own pumpkins and like tried some
Okay.
hay rides and stuff. And I was like, this is a nightmare. I was like, I live here. This is
Okay.
like making this place into a zoo. Like, yeah,
Right.
we moved away from all of that, but I still have the seasonality, which I really like because like there's a time of the, you know, the year when I'm focused on stuff that's not in the shop, you know, and then like everything outside the shop is like you're reacting to stuff all the time. It's like kind of chaotic, and
Right.
it's all kind of like macro stuff, you know,
Yeah.
like oh a tree fell down onto that building or whatever. And then
Shit.
like, you know, so after, you know, like this the season of doing that, like I get to come into the shop and I'm like, okay, everything in here is like under my control
Mm,
for the most part, and like I
okay.
focus on like micro things. And then
Yeah.
after like the winter of doing that every day, you know, for months, I'm like, I got to get outside and go
Right.
like
You're like,
mow the
"Alright."
lawn. I got to go cut some trees up, like, you know. So it's nice to have both.
That's good. Yeah, I think that's for anybody trying to do knife making full time, it is very challenging to not get caught in ruts or feel the real burnout that happens from just kind of just doing the same thing over and over again. And I know that's part of what's been like kind of our industrial world for the last, 150, 200 years or whatever. But so I think I don't think it's necessarily a luxury. I mean, I guess for some people it could be a luxury, but I think it is good to have that balance or have that flexibility to have a couple different things, a couple different ways that you are doing work to earn money so that things kind of stay fresh. Um, Most of the time, I guess. And
Yeah,
I've
I
I've
mean,
done that by, like, doing more instructional work so that I'm
right,
getting out of the shop and I'm seeing people and interacting with people, and which at times I need, but then I do them and I'm like, "Okay, I'm ready to be by myself again and get back in the shop and do
right,
some
yeah.
work."
I feel like so many creative people are pretty introverted. It's not a coincidence that like knife making is such a solitary thing. You know,
Sure.
it's really interesting to see like what a lot of people and like you have done with it, where there's like this big like outburst of community and like
Right.
you're involved. I mean, obviously it's just like part of your work. Like, is you know if you're a content creator and you're reaching out all the time. You know,
Yeah.
but I mean, yeah, at the end of the day, it's just like it's just you in your shop staring at something like inches in front of your face, you know?
Yeah, just like at
100%,
the
yeah.
at the tip of your nose, basically.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. I always
And
thought, like, do you
yeah,
remember
go ahead.
those memes that were going around that was like what my mom thinks I do, what my coworkers think I do, what I really do? You remember
Yeah,
those?
sure.
Like, I always thought it'd be funny one to do with my making and be like, this like big dude
Big
hammering like
muscly
a
dude just like
Viking forge, right?
Yeah.
Sparks everywhere. It's like the what I really do is just like sanding,
Yeah, he's like, "Tiki,
just
tiki,
totally.
tiki."
Yeah, this is
Yeah.
90% of it.
Yeah, no, and that's the thing, like, a lot of people, when I tell them I make knives and I forge blades and stuff, they're like, "Oh, wow, that's so great. You must, like, get a lot of exercise, or
Right.
forging in the winter, you must stay really warm." I'm like,
Nope.
"Boy, I wish that was it."
Yeah.
It's 'cause realistically, the forging aspect is maybe 10%. And the rest
Yeah.
of it is all like these finicky fit ups and glue up and sculpting and grinding and
Right.
finish work and all that kind of stuff. Sometimes just the blade finish work can take me like 3 days. And
Oh,
people are like,
easy.
"How long does it
Yeah.
take to make a knife? Like 3 days?" I'm like, "No, sorry.
Yeah.
Not this knife, at least."
Yeah.
And so
Oh, dude,
cool.
I saw, I think it was, a post from Anchorage
Okay.
Brewing or Anchorage Forge,
Yeah.
um,
Gabe.
of a
Yeah.
knife that I think that he had just recently got from you. I didn't see the date on the post,
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
but it was like a
Yeah. That was
Damascus,
right at the beginning of the
clad.
year.
Okay, dude, that handle with
Yeah.
the little shoulders on the facets, that
Yeah.
is so cool. I was like, "Oh,
Yeah.
man, that's
Yeah.
nasty."
I've done that once before, and honestly, this is gonna sound like a silly cop out, but on the time I did it before, it was I was struggling with the facets, and ideally, and like a maker like Yella Hasenberg, who's over in I think he's up in Dublin, Ireland, or
Yeah,
somewhere in that area. He gets these really cool facets and contours, but part of the way that works is that his handle material isn't straight. They're at very extreme, like the
right.
planes are very extreme in how they interact with each other, and that's how I get my facets to work. But as if you're struggling with the sculpting and those facets get flatter and flatter and flatter,
Yeah,
then
you
you
run
lose
out of
that
room.
definition. You're like, "What the fuck do I do now?"
Right.
And I was like, "Well, maybe," and I just used my hand sanding stick that I use for my blade hand sanding. I just used
Mhm.
that. And I was like, "Maybe I can just step down, and that will really help that define that difference between that hand or from that facet to the other one." That didn't happen on this one for Gabe. And, but it was after I did it, I was like, "Damn, you know what? That actually kinda looks cool."
Yeah,
So
that's the thing
so
now. You just made a new thing. Like, I hadn't seen that particular thing before. I mean, this is, like, really nuanced, obviously, but,
Sure.
like, I was like saw that, I was like, "Oh, it's like a new thing unlocked," you know?
Yeah, yeah, and so on the piece that Gabe has, yeah, I had been sitting on the idea of doing that intentionally, not as a fix, but as an
Right.
intentional design aspect, and it came out I was so happy with it, and it yeah, it looked really good. And actually, the handle already looked great, but it was a piece of Cocobolo handle material that I hadn't seen, or it's probably actually the best piece of Cocobolo handle material I've ever seen, with so much curl and depth and figure, and there's like a knot in part of it, and the way it all just kind of comes together and the variation of colors, because Cocobolo can sometimes just be like almost pure black, or it has these like subtle or vibrant or deep purples and oranges and
Right.
yellows, and all this stuff just kind of like kaleidoscopically intertwined within itself. And that piece had a lot of those different colors and contours and textures and stuff. So I was like, I really wanted to do something that really made all of that kind of pop and stand apart. And yeah, it came out really good.
Yeah, that
I'm definitely
that
happy
knife
with
was
it.
sick.
Yeah.
I mean, they're all sick, man, but
Yeah,
that
and
one
I
caught my attention.
Yeah, and the only picture of it right now is just the one that Gabe posted up, but I have photos I took, I just need to get those posted up. But I was just kinda, I have a tendency to, like, take a bunch of photos and then send the knife off, and then post the photos either right away or completely forget about them, and
Right.
and never, but, like, I have several knives over the years that I've just have never posted, but I gotta get those pictures up. But yeah, that came out good, so I appreciate the
Yeah.
kind words.
I
Yeah.
just I just put something on up on Instagram. I'm so bad with social media, and just kind of marketing in general. But like there's a couple of knives that I made a little while ago, but I had to finally jump back in. It's like after I don't know, it's like a couple of months or something. I'm not really posting anything. And then it's like
Sure.
once it's been that long, I'm like, oh, like I better have something good to come back with. So I gotta jump back in there and
Yeah.
be a little more active with it. I'm
Yeah.
jealous. I'm jealous of your like amount of content. Like you're keeping it going. It's like clear that there's like a sort of plan. You know.
I mean, there used to be a lot more of a plan. Nowadays, I think I need to revisit what my plan is, or kind of like my strategy. But really, I just need to be more or it doesn't even have to be that intensive, really. But just posting more of like in the kitchen knife forums we were talking about earlier, like some of the threads that people post in there are whip threads, and they're just
Right.
showing the progress of what they're doing. It doesn't have to be super glamorous. It doesn't even have to have a massive caption. You literally can just have one line. But sharing that process is such a big part of how to kind of market yourself online. And I hate it when people refer, I mean, technically it is self-promotion, but if you're not promoting yourself, 1, who's gonna do it? Or 2, are you gonna pay somebody to do it? And most of us can only really afford for us to do it. So we gotta take the time to do it. And so the
Right.
question is, how do we do it? What do we do? And I think the easiest way is honestly through social media, especially like Instagram, um, or Facebook or whatever your flavor is, but you don't even have to be using your face. I mean, if you can take the time every once in a while to just post a little picture or talk about something, or even hearing your voice, and like taking video. I used to take videos. I'm sorry, I'm like all over the place. I used to take videos and I would try to get the video and all the audio all in one take. And it finally dawned on me, and I'm like, "Ah, I'm so stupid," because I would do like 20 takes, and it would take for fucking ever. And
Right.
that was really one of those things that really killed my desire to do posts, because I've really slowed down over the years. But now with especially the ability to do a voiceover, um, I just take a video, whatever the video I want it to look like, and that's a lot easier for me to do now, or picture, or actually, sorry, video. And then I'll go back, and you can either double them up, or uh, add the layers in Instagram, or you can do it through a different app, a secondary app. I use Splice, which is a free app off
Yeah,
that
I've
I
used that.
just use, which is actually a super handy app. It's got a lot of great tools in it. Uh, but and then I just taught, and then I just, instead of trying to do the thing and make sure I'm like holding the camera at the right angle and the right lighting and saying all
Right.
the right words all at once, I just do the video, and then I step over here and I do the audio.
Right.
And then I post that, and it's become so much easier. But again, anything, whatever you can do to help engage basically the customer in what you are doing, because a lot of the reason people are buying our stuff is not only the appreciation for the level of work or the quality of work, but is also the person that you are.
Yeah,
Because
of
trust me,
course.
like for me personally, I have no interest in buying something from somebody who's like a neo-Nazi or a fucking racist asshole or something, right? Like
Right.
I have no interest in giving them my money. And
Right.
that's what it's about. It's like it's it's like
No,
endearing yourself in a way. And it's not being inauthentic, but it like the only way you can do this unless you're gonna meet people and face to face is through social media. And so it's like allowing kind of like inviting people to get to know you a little better
right.
and how that relates to your work.
Yeah, I think that like there are a lot of different aspects of like knife making business, right? And there are some people
Yeah.
who kind of just like, they have their models and they sit down and they produce,
Yeah.
um and then I think there are people who are more like, I mean, there's art knives, right? There's like that far end where you basically, it's like it's jewelry, but it's on a knife instead of like a necklace,
Bling
right?
in. Yeah.
Right. And then there's somewhere in between, which is like maybe where guys like you and I are at, where like, you're really concentrating on each individual piece. You have like, intention in your design, and
Yeah.
you have a sort of like, not a theme, but just like a style of your own that you're pushing forward, and maybe pushing like the corners out, on that,
Mhm.
but like you're staying in that. And it's really like art that we're doing. And like if you look at famous artists, like people who have like been really successful and everything like that, like it's not like people don't care about who that is. Like people are interested in artists, like, I don't know, crazy famous. I don't know anything about the art world, but like I'm thinking like,
Sure.
but like Jackson Pollock or something, right? Somebody,
Right.
he's like some crazy like alcoholic weird dude that he's like interesting. Like I
Yeah.
feel like people want to know what people who have given themselves to
Yeah.
this creative pursuit are like, because I think a lot of people like maybe want a piece of that. Maybe they feel
Sure.
that like they, like they're maybe jealous of that kind of lifestyle, or think that like a part of them wants to be, doing that, where they're, pouring themselves into this one
Mhm.
particular pursuit. And like, yeah, I think that if you're not showing that, you're not showing yourself.
Yeah.
Um, then, what are you expecting people to buy?
Yeah.
I don't I like, yeah, that kind of like, I go back and forth on this kind of stuff, because like I don't I there's a really narcissistic weird thing about social media.
Yeah.
And I
For
think
sure.
it's done a lot of damage, I think, in
Mhm.
our culture, both to, like, to individual people, and but also just to who we are and how we are. And I think that, especially in our country, like, Americans are just profoundly individualistic. We're
Yeah.
all ourselves, and we're all sort of like, the sovereign individual. um but the problem with that is that, like, that there's an aspect of that character that is like narcissistic, and they can
Yeah.
go to a place where it's unhealthy. And I think that so much of social media has uh a real tendency to like push people in that direction. And it's a
Mhm.
lot of stuff that, people, you look at what people are doing, and a lot of it just like, it's like, man, this is just picture after picture of you, like,
Oh
here's me
god.
doing this, here's me doing that, here's me looking hot over here, and here's me looking cool over here. And like it's like, oh man, it's like a lot about you. But that's what self promotion is at the same time. And so, like,
Mhm.
I don't know, I sort of struggle with that. But
Yeah.
but yeah, none of that should like stop you from actually trying to, like, you know promote your craft, because after all, I mean, it is a job, and
Yeah.
that's the point.
Yeah. Yeah, and if like say we're not making knives. Like even just look at any other business. Like look at a grocery store. Like they send out mailers. They have they sponsor all kinds of stuff or like there's every business no matter what it is has to promote and advertise in some way to draw in customers. And but it is a unique thing for us as kind of bespoke crafters or makers of bespoke things to try that's a little bit trickier because it's less of a consumer item and it is like you're saying more of an art piece. And so when the work is more of like an art piece and what not only what that says or what the maker was trying to express or intimate through the creation of the thing, but what does it also say potentially about the customer who's buying it? And that's why, going back to, like, I wouldn't spend my money buying something from somebody who's a racist or something like that, because it's like,
Right.
if I buy this thing from that person and they're known to be that, I'm also simultaneously saying something about myself,
Right.
right? And I don't identify with that at all, which is why I would never spend that money on that. And so that's
Right.
something and I'm that's a weird thing to keep going down, but
No,
just as an
I understand what you
example.
do. It's like when you're trying to like sort of like see if an idea is true, right? Then you take it out to like its logical extreme, and you're like,
Right.
okay, well if it's obvious when you take it all the way out there, but it's like it's way out there, then like then it's a little bit out here, like
Mhm.
in where I'm actually working. I know what you
Yeah.
mean.
Yeah. So, yeah, I think, yeah, it's just it's important to connect with people, because other if you're not connecting with your potential customers, clients, through the things you're posting and or your process, and I've especially on your Instagram, you've done a really great job of showing various aspects of your process, which draws people in. It's not just the finished piece, but it's the little nuanced steps and paths that were needed to take to get to that place, and that adds to the depth of kind of, it's storytelling with not necessarily actually storytelling, 'cause it's visual storytelling, and so they're just kinda like, it's almost like they're watching a silent film in a way. You have
Right.
a clip of something, they have a caption, maybe it's a big caption, maybe it's not, but it helps to bring them and carry them along the process of the development and creation of this thing until boom, it's done, and they just, like, they've watched something, like you were saying, with the leather making and the saddle making earlier, they've literally watched something from conceptual, sometimes from drawings. I've seen makers do drawings, conceptual art. Actually, Josh Weston is really great about showing, like, his conceptual art, and he has that talent. Like, he comes from a graphic design, artistic background, so he has that ability to create a conceptual art drawing, and then follow takes people along the path and the journey of developing and creating that thing, which also often, or not often, but sometimes involves the failures along the way. And so it's like,
Right.
it's a story arc that has the ups and downs and your struggles and the joys and all that stuff. And as human beings, like, we are driven to tell story or to be drawn into story, because that's just what we've done, like, since we first learned how to communicate to each other verbally, right? And maybe
Sure.
even before that, honestly. Right? And so it's all about telling a story and giving somebody something to connect with. And so, as they've, like, for Josh's pieces, for as example, they see where it originally started in the picture, and then they see the finished thing. And they've seen a thing come from out of the ether, or like just like synaptic electrical signals in somebody's brain, manifested into the world as a physical item that now exists, that can be held and observed and turned over and looked at from all different angles and stuff like that. It's like, it's
Right.
really unique and interesting thing. And I think we have, again, through social media, a unique opportunity to be able to help take people along that path and those journeys. And some people don't choose, they just poop, they just drop down the finished pictures. And that also is part of, like, a personal choice of, like, what you want your social media page to look like.
Right.
I'm looking at it, though, as though people are basically, like, opening up, like, a little portal into my life, into my world, and they're seeing what I'm doing, and then they
Yeah.
disappear for a little bit.
I kind of go back and forth in thinking that like what this is a place to like show pictures of knives because that's what people are interested in, or
Sure.
is this a place where you kind of like tell your story and you're documenting like your lifestyle, or at least in a way that like looks
Yeah,
like you want it to look, right? I mean, it's
right.
kind of all
Yeah, it's definitely
it's all a
curated.
little right. It's curated, right? Not fabricated, but curated,
Yeah.
right? I mean, that's yeah. I mean, that's kind of the point, but yeah, I kind of go back and forth on that. Is like how much of what kind of stuff to share or not.
Mhm.
There's so much that I do that is not knife stuff that like doesn't really have anything to do with it. Maybe there's a through line through food if it's like the hunting, fishing, spearfishing, like this
Mhm.
stuff I do. Um, I don't really post stuff about that on social media. I kind of used
Sure.
to, but like at the same time, I kind of felt like, maybe this is just knife stuff. That's what people want to see. They're not
Yeah.
coming here for like all this. Like, what's with all this, bow hunting stuff? Who cares, But maybe I'm wrong about that. Maybe the way to go is to be like more about, telling your story about, how
Yeah.
you live and all that.
Yeah. Yeah, and I don't think it has to be. I mean, I can't say how people are gonna approach it and whether they think it's gonna be from like, "I'm gonna become famous," or maybe it's just like, it's sharing in the human struggle. And I think a lot often the people that I connect with that show some of that struggle helps me to feel like I'm not alone in a way, in
Oh
various
yeah.
aspects, right? And
Yeah.
so it's also kind of bringing that human element to the work that you're creating.
Yeah.
And these pieces being kind of almost not to get too like woo-woo or spiritual or anything, but like they're like a reflection of ourselves in a way, and the struggles that we go through, and the difficulties and the joys and all that kind of stuff. I don't know, I'm getting like super emotional all of a sudden.
oh, oh, Veronica.
I'm an emotional dude. I'm very sensitive.
No, it's great. It's great. I am too, man. I'm right there with you.
Yeah. So I think, I mean, but like I said, I think you're doing a great job. I love seeing your posts whenever I see them. And I also, another thing, and I've talked about it here on my Patreon, as well as in other places when I'm talking to makers about like how to present your work, especially through social media, because it is very limited, especially when people are just looking at it on their phone. And you do a really great job of getting like up close and personal into a lot of the various aspects and angles and details that you wouldn't necessarily see from an overall picture, that
Right.
you could only see if you're holding it in your hands up close. You create kind of that opportunity for people through your photographs. I'm actually gonna pull this one up here. It's a great detail shot of the transition from your bolster, or from your I think is it bronze material in your spacers and your handle into the integral or semi-integral. I don't know. We'll
Uh
have to get into that and talk
yeah.
about that.
It's
But
it's
as it
it's
transitions out
brass. I
into the
wish it
blade.
was bronze because bronze sounds so much cooler. But it's brass. Yeah.
Okay. I mean, bronze is all brass is actually people poo-poo on brass, which cracks me up. It is a very expensive material, and I don't think people realize like it,
I think that bronze seems classy and brass
sure.
maybe seems trashy. I think that's
I don't know. I think
at least that's what the words sound different in that way. It's like it's
sure.
brass, like,
Yeah. You just need
but
to
no,
like find a
that
bunch of zildjian symbols and cut them all up and then stack
yeah,
them up and
exactly.
do like a
Yeah,
mokume thing.
that'd be cool.
I don't actually know if that would work, if there's tin in it or not, or
Right.
how that would affect it. But anyways, but like that photograph, and especially when it gets in the handle to blade transitions again, the detail, and you're getting an up close look at the fine grain of the Damascus pattern, as well as that brute to forge texture in the blade that has been left behind from when you were forging the blade, which I've always loved and appreciated, because it helps to preserve various aspects or steps of the knife making process before it gets to the refined product. Like all my pieces are like all of the steps that it takes to get there are lost in the grinding. Very few pieces of mine
Right.
actually preserve some of the process or the history of it. It's just like just like super polished out, refined, finished piece.
Right.
But I want to do more where it kind of preserves some of that forged texture, so that people can see more of that and in the
Yeah,
finished
I
piece.
remember when I, was sort of making decisions about what my work was going to be, like when I felt that my work had sort of reached a level that I was, you know, going to start selling it or put my name on it and put it
Yeah.
out there as a,
Mhm.
a brand. Um, and I had the thought that, like, why forge something if you're not going to be able to see that was forged? I mean, we knife makers know that an integral knife needs to be forged, right? Unless
Right.
maybe you could buy like an integral blank, but like,
Excuse me.
you know,
Yeah.
um, but if you can't tell, why do all of that if the
Right.
object itself doesn't tell that story of like, of how it was made? um so I liked, like, when I was first starting out and I was just, on the internet looking at pictures of knives, like, since we're, for hours and hours and hours, just like,
Yeah.
just trying to get inspiration or be like, oh, that's a cool thing. I want to try that.
Mhm.
And one of the earliest knife makers that I latched onto is like, oh, that is like something I gotta like, incorporate aspects of that was Taigu.
Oh, yeah, sure.
Um, like he's been around forever. Like I feel
I'm
like you
actually
and
gonna see
I.
him in Arizona at the Travis Wertzhammer. I've
Oh
never
yeah.
met him before.
Oh, you
He's
should
gonna
have
be
him.
there.
You should have him on here. I want to hear it.
Yeah,
Um, but like he seems like a wild dude.
yeah,
Like he's been making knives since like way before it was cool. Like I
right.
feel like you and I got in like before the big explosion that's
Boom, yeah,
happened,
sure.
but
Yeah,
he
yeah.
was in here like, man, there wasn't any information around.
Right.
That was like pre-internet, that he was out there in Arizona with like a bunch of other dudes like
Mhm.
forging knives under the full moon and stuff like
Right.
that.
Yeah.
But his work was so cool. It was like clearly very well designed, like
Mhm.
nothing out of place, clearly handmade.
Yeah,
And but like, you know, the right proportions, the right curves, the right angles, like beautiful, and that I was like, okay, that's a look that like that really draws me, and that
yeah,
people have always responded really well to, because like
yeah.
I think that we knife makers forget um what the perspective of a non-knife maker is like. Like I don't
Sure.
I don't think we know how to look at our work or other people's work from the
Y
perspective of a buyer,
Fresh eyes, yeah.
or even
Or
just a
even yeah,
person who would be interested, who might,
yeah. No, that's a
throw
good
you a
point.
follow on Instagram or something.
Yeah,
Um, and people always just responded really well to that. Like I feel like, it's easy to say that like the forged finish or the croce finish or whatever is like that's kind of overdone. And like, yeah, I mean a lot of people do that. But you know, that's something that like people on social media might say or think or whatever, who are like in this community.
right.
Everybody from outside of it, which is really probably what I'm selling to, is like has
Yeah,
responded well to that.
yeah.
So yeah, so that's like the style that I work in, and sometimes it feels limiting, because
Okay.
I mean, well, just because anytime you have a framework, like if you have your design, you're like, this is my design, this is what people expect from me, like this is
Right.
my style. It
Mhm.
both is like, it's something you stay comfortably within, but then it maybe is like could be constraining. I mean, it's entirely up to the individual, right?
Yeah,
That's up to the person's like sort of creative process or journey or whatever to like stay within stuff or not. I've found that I'm much more comfortable staying in the sort of like designs that I feel that people like um, are expecting, from a Billipp
sure.
knife.
Yeah.
And part of
Yeah,
that, I would say like a big part of that is that forged finish.
yeah. Yeah, I think I and sometimes or yeah, I feel like I've kind of, like, pigeonholed myself in a way because I am very interested and attracted to, like, a rough forged or brute to forge aesthetic, and I've only like I said, I have done a few of them, but I have a hard time even giving myself permission to do them
Right.
and sell them because I'm so well known for really highly refined looking knives. Um, but I think I need to the permission has to start with me, I think, to
Yeah,
say, "You can do that. You can
of
take the
course.
time, step aside from your normal stuff." It honestly is usually well received. I just, like I struggle with, the idea of what is expected of me, and I have heard from other people who are interested in my stuff that like, you do this style so well, you should just stay there. But it's like for me as a creative person, it gets boring. And maybe
Yeah,
it's also my ADHD brain, but I get fucking bored. And once I start getting bored, but I still have to keep doing that same thing, that's when I
right.
really start to experience like burnout and shit like that.
Yeah, I think it's like that's maybe that's like an ADD thing. I'm like, yeah, I don't know, ADHD, whatever. Like what,
Yeah.
whatever you got to call that, that's me
High
for sure.
definition crazy
Yeah, I
brain.
think it's like a superpower. I mean, it's like
Sure,
it's
it can be,
it's like
yeah.
that ability to like shut the world out and just like completely like single track focus on this
Yeah.
one thing. As like I was saying earlier, like I don't ever feel like I have a choice. Like this is just something that's like feels like it's like happening to me. It's just
Right.
this mania of like obsessing about these things,
Mhm.
and it's a powerful tool to apply to any, kind of interest. But man, when
Yeah.
it's not there, like I like boredom is like the same thing as depression to me. It's like
Sure.
they're like, it's the same thing. So like if I don't have that thing that I'm like the border collie like chasing a tennis ball, like I don't,
Yeah,
then I'm like just like despondent, I gotta
I
go
got you.
find the new thing.
Yeah.
Which I've done like in knife making. I've sort of found that new thing a number of times, and like so that's another help with like the seasonality of my work, and why like the way these things have sort of ended up happening for me is just kind of been very lucky.
Mhm.
um I didn't intend to be like, I'm gonna be like I'm gonna run this business for this part of the year and then do that, but like it actually is great because it just gives me this break. And then in that amount of time, I was like, I don't feel like I don't have projects that I'm committed to, and
Mhm.
so I can just kind of like think about what I might want to make.
Yeah.
It all ends up being pretty much in the same vein. Like I don't like I see a lot of people who are clearly like very like versatile knife makers who can make a lot of different things. Like I make what I make. That's all I know how to make. Like
I got
that's
you.
all the tools I have in my
Yeah,
shop are for. You know what I mean? Like I
I see.
like making like a stock removal type knife with handle scales is like, and I don't even have like the gear for that.
Right.
You could probably pull it off, but like in any kind of like efficient way, like that's
Yeah.
just not really what I do. I'd love to get better at that and have an outlet for that. Um, but no, it's like I don't know. I just kind of stay in this lane, and that seems to have worked for me.
Yeah. I have this picture here. It's it must have been a set that you made, but it's a well, now that I'm looking at it again, I'm guess it must be a paring knife and a chef's knife. For in my head, I was like, "That's a hunting knife."
Oh,
Um, but you do have I guess, a question that I've been kinda thinking on is, how did you settle on culinary knives? What was it about it particularly? If it was just like you saw an opportunity for culinary knives, or if it comes from your own background of cooking or interest in cooking, and then like I know I've seen a couple like outdoor use knives, like this integral guard, I think hunter. Um, and how does that inform how does your life and experience inform the style of knives that you're actually making? And then how you're making them, like what the edge profiles look like and what the
right.
blade profile and all that kind of stuff, how the handle feels, all of that.
Yeah, that's a good question. So I decided to focus on culinary knives like around the time that we moved out here, and I
Okay.
set up my shop here, and like my experience in farming and all the stuff that I was doing was that I was like, this is not really what I want to be doing. What my
Mhm.
mind is being pulled toward all the time is like, I want to get in the shop and I want to figure this stuff out. And I
Yeah.
decided to focus on the culinary knives because um, they're big. They're like big knives. That's kind of fun. And I
Yeah.
wasn't that interested in making fighters and bowies, which is what was the main like. If you were like a badass knife maker
That's what you made.
around like 2010, right? You
Yeah.
made like, Bowies like Nick Wheeler, style
Yeah.
stuff.
Sure.
Um, and I loved the fit and finish of all that. I loved the design, like, and seeing how that was sort of like a, that was a canvas uh for real advancements in
Mhm.
like in knife making technique and everything. But I was like, what am I gonna do with this thing? That was
Right.
the way I thought about it. Is like
Yeah.
I mean I work outside and stuff like that. I don't carry a Bowie knife. Like it's fun, but like
Yeah.
I hunt, I fish, I work outside. I have
Yeah.
like don't need a Bowie knife, and
Sure.
you know more power to you if you do. Like rock on, dude, do your thing. For me, like I saw that culinary knives were like the ones that actually get used.
Mhm.
Like you can make it. There are badass fighting knives out there, and I mean, like we've been at war for like 25 years or something like that. So like, yeah, those could get used, but like you
Sure.
make like a really nasty like Persian fighter, right? It's like, and it has all these aspects to it that you're like, oh, this is specifically designed so that like it cuts like this and it stabs real well and opens up a wide wound channel and all that. But it's like, is the customer going to use it to do all those things?
Sure.
So like all those performance aspects are like, you know, I don't want to talk shit about anything that anyone's doing. So please, like, don't
Yeah, yeah, no.
nobody
I'm not taking
listening
that like
think that like, you know, I'm trying to like dog at anybody. But to me, it was more interesting to like work on performance aspects that the customer's going to see and feel, you
Yeah.
know? And so there's obviously an opportunity in culinary knives to do that, because like to make a knife that works really well and that is
Mhm.
like exceptional, not just in how it looks hanging on the wall, but and like how it feels to hold, but how it actually cuts through food is like that was a puzzle that was really interesting to me. And I
Sure.
and at the time there weren't a ton of people doing that. I mean, there are a million, you know, culinary knife makers out there now, and the level of work, like I think this is largely due to you and all of your content and sharing, you know,
Oh.
test grind stuff and all this kind of stuff. But the
Yeah.
level of everyone's work. I mean, I'm not cutting with all these people's knives, but
Sure.
like
No,
it
no.
looks
Yeah.
great. Like people are clearly like there's a huge market for, you know, culinary knives, which the knife making community seems to have woken up to in the last like 5-10 years, right?
Yeah.
At the time, early, like there weren't, like when I started and kind of launched Billipp Knives, there weren't that many people in the U.S. doing that,
Mhm.
um, and you know, now there are a ton. But I mean, the
Yeah.
amount of people who might spend a bunch of money on uh, a big Bowie knife seemed to me to be much smaller than the amount
Right.
of people who might spend a bunch of money on a nice kitchen knife,
Right.
because everybody cooks.
Yeah. Well, and it works a dual function. Like it's got all that aesthetic beauty and all that stuff that people might appreciate from a handcrafted Bowie knife or camp knife
Right.
or whatever. Um, but you can also use it.
Right.
And you
Yeah.
can
Exactly.
and when you pull it out of the drawer or off the block, the magnet block or whatever, to start slicing up and preparing meals while people are sitting around chatting with you, like, it's a conversation starter and or people are excited to also use it themselves versus, you know, you're not
Right.
gonna pass off the Bowie knife to somebody and be like, "All right, there's a big old chunk of meat. Let's go
Yeah, like,
chop
"Here,
into it."
let's hang this, like, 1-inch thick rope here, and we'll we'll cut pieces out of it." Which is cool, like, that's
It
awesome
could be
to
cool.
do that.
Yeah, yeah. But yeah, no, I that's what I really love about the culinary knives too, is that they like if you think about it, they I feel like they don't necessarily have the same mystique that like Bowie knives and swords and all these other
Right,
knives have. But I think a lot of that is due to the fact that we use culinary knives day in and day out around in almost all households around the world to
sure.
prepare food and stuff like that. Um, and so it's
Yeah,
because it's part of our like the ubiquity of everyday life, it's not as special, but the reality is like if any knife should be really well crafted and handmade and also aesthetically appealing and all that kind of stuff, it should be a culinary knife,
right.
because it's gonna get all that use, and it's actually gonna serve a real utilitarian function as well as an aesthetic, function in everybody's
Yeah, and, like,
people's lives.
our life here, like, is like, our whole, like, home life is all sort of, like, focused around the kitchen. That's the
Right.
center of our home. Like, we renovated our home a while ago, and we made the living room and the kitchen basically one space with our wood stove in the middle of it. Um, and the idea there was that just like anytime we had people over, and like we're sort of like between my wife's family and my family, we're sort of centrally located, and we have
Okay.
big space and, you know, all this, so we host all the holidays, and like where
Oh,
this is
wow.
the place where our families come to get together.
Yeah.
And that's what this place has always kind of been for, is like this is a place for people to come and visit and be comfortable and like have good food. Like we grow food here, you know,
Yeah.
that's what we do. And um that like there's something about the culinary knives are tied to that sort of community that you have in like the space where you're making food together, you
Right.
know. And making, like, it's funny that so many people don't like to cook, but it also makes perfect sense. because like if you gave somebody like a bunch of battered old like beat up saws and hammers and levels that aren't level and
Right.
stuff and ask them to go make a doghouse, they're going to be like, this sucks, you know, like this is not fun. Carpentry sucks. I don't know why anyone does this, you know. But if
Right.
you give somebody like nice, sharp tools, like, you know, like a plane that's like perfectly sharpened and
Mhm.
adjusted and just throws those beautiful curls off the wood, is like, you can lose yourself in that. Like that's
Sure.
beautiful. Whereas
Yeah.
like trying to hack at something with like the wrong tool or just something that's all blunt is like, this is miserable. And you're trying to cook, you know, it makes cooking such a chore when
Yeah.
you have a shitty tool. If you have a shitty knife, like, you know, it's just like it's grating, it's all this like the whole feel of it is like it's not nice. And then that's what that whole chore becomes. And that could kind of like ripple out into just like into the whole vibe of the
Yeah.
scene. I mean, like, that's like that's a level of sensitivity that like maybe is like, you know, not really called for. But there is something about having a nice tool that makes that job more enjoyable, and then that makes that
Yeah.
scene more enjoyable. And I've
Well,
I've really
yeah.
seen that here.
Yeah, I believe it, and I've been very fortunate to have that experience with you at least once, maybe a couple times, cooking with you in your house, and it was a blast. It was so cool. I had a great time, and it definitely has that guess that warmth or that sensitivity you're talking about, just that it is cooking for others is a way of showing love and care for each other, because you're literally providing nourishment, like life-sustaining nourishment to somebody else.
Yeah, for sure.
And it's really that's a I'm just, like, reflecting on the idea of, like, why is it that kitchens always seem to be, like, the place where often when people get together, they always kinda gravitate to the
That's
kitchen?
where everybody ends up. That's why we built our house around the kitchen and
Well, and
made
I
like a
love that.
living space attached to it, because they were like, this is where everybody ends up. You have a nice couch in your like
Yeah.
living room that nobody lives in because it's not a comfortable space. And that like, you know, anytime you have a bunch of people over in your house, like you're all gonna have a meal together. So that's what everything's focused around.
Yeah.
So that's where everyone ends up jamming into the kitchen, you know.
Yeah.
So now there's no room to work in here because everyone's stuffed in here. So it's like we we realized that, and we're like, all right, we just need to make this space really big so that
Yeah.
everybody, so people in that room can also be in this room and they can be like a part of this, but we can also have separate spaces if we need
Yeah.
to.
Right, well, and I'm also just thinking about like, you live in an older house, like a
Yeah.
farmhouse, and
And
so
it's not that old. It was just like, I
yeah.
think when you were here, it was like, it's kind of run down.
I don't think it was run down. But
It's nicer now.
even just thinking like, 100 years ago, a couple 100 years ago, like, the kitchen probably was the warmest place in the house because that's where the main heat source was because that's where you
Right.
cooked, and so people gathering in the kitchen makes sense. Even going back and I'm just like this is almost fantasizing away, but it's just like going back to cavemen, like, where are people gonna hang out? They're gonna be hanging around, especially on cold in the evenings, cold nights, around the fire where the most warmth is, communing with each other, sharing stories, talking, like sharing this, but also sharing meals and cooking with each other because they've done all of this work to forage and gather and hunt and bring this food together to share with each other. And I really think that honestly, like as I don't know, my belief is that it really is like part of our innate genetic drive to gather in that way, especially when it comes to food. And it's so important because that's where community comes together. That's how
Oh yeah, no,
everybody,
it's like it's
it's
elemental,
it's so
you know.
powerful. Yeah.
Yeah, it's really it's, you know, it's deep to sort of like, you know, like human experience.
Yeah.
That
Yeah.
would, I mean, there's a lot of that kind of thing. Like, I don't know if have you hunted ever? Did you ever end up getting out on a hunt?
I've never
We had
hunted.
talked about that when you were here, but then I think we both just kind of got busy, kid stuff and
Yeah.
everything, and we never
Yeah,
made that
no,
happen.
I've never hunted, but I just actually I just got back from South Carolina yesterday from an event called Winter Strong that brings hunters and outdoorsmen together, uh, with fitness and athletes, honestly.
Sure.
Like, there were people there that played in, like, professional football and who are, like, the athletic trainers and strength and conditioning coaches for some of
Oh,
the
that
most
that sounds
talented
awesome.
teams in the United States. And, and every time, like, I'm shooting archery or I'm shooting the rifle and people are like, "Yeah, have you like, where do you like to go hunting?" I'm like, "I've never gone hunting." I've always loved marksman sports and marksmanship, whatever it is, whether it's playing pool or shooting a rifle or archery. I've always loved it, but I've never actually gone hunting. But I really have this, like, deep seated desire to go, really, and especially since I've become a knife maker, more than anything, to better understand the tools that that hunters are using to do the
Right.
work that they need to do out in the field to dress an animal so that it's ready to come home. And then, like, I would love to go and take a butchery course to better understand how to break down, and or maybe that's a secondary aspect of the night of the hunting, is breaking down the animal further into and trimming them, and yeah, again, breaking it down, and just really to, like, understand that aspect of life, but also the tools that they use to do that work. And
Sure.
so no, I haven't. That was my really long answer to say no. I have not gone hunting yet,
Well,
but I
I think
do
that
desire to.
yeah, I mean, what you're talking about, like, the sort of, like, very basic and elemental feeling of, like, food and community and how
Mhm.
that is, like, it's sort of, it's kinda baseline, you know? And, like, a lot of the things that are really satisfying that you kind of know, like, inside are right to do
Mhm.
are sort of they kind of exist in that space. Like,
Yeah.
uh, hunting and then, making food and sharing the food from, an animal that you've taken or that you were, along with when it was taken with
Right.
people is like a very it's very powerful, in that same way.
Yeah.
And it would be, it's something I hope that you can go and experience that because,
I will someday for
it's
sure.
really rewarding. Maybe we could do that together someday. That'd be pretty cool.
I would love that.
I hope we haven't missed our opportunity. It sucks that we didn't do more
No.
when you were in Connecticut. As like I remember you moved away. I was like, oh man, like what happened? That
I
time
mean,
just
I
like flew by.
yeah, the last couple of years, I have been coming back up to the Northeast, though, to do the maker camp, and then afterwards, I teach a class or do something. While because 'cause I'm
Yeah.
all the way over there, I might as well do something while I'm there. But I don't know what October looks like hunting-wise.
Oh yeah, it's
Um,
busy. Like right in
yeah.
there. And oftentimes we'll take a trip then because that's generally when our season ends.
Okay.
Um, and then let's say I went to Texas last year. I did some hunting down there, and then yeah, family stuff around then. That's like
Yeah.
always a busy month. It's
Yeah.
also when like everything is happening here, like
Right,
fishing
for
wise and everything. That's when
oh, okay.
all the bluefish stripers and everything are running. Like that's the time to be like on the water. But
Yeah.
any of that stuff. And next time you're out, we should definitely hook up and like go get out on the boat or something.
Okay.
That'd
Sick.
be awesome.
Yeah. But, so you were asking me about if I've gone hunting. What were you working towards? I can't
Well, I
remember.
was working towards like what you how you had described like the sort of like a satisfaction of making
Mm,
food with people and the sort of
yeah.
like feeling of
Oh, right, right,
community
right.
that
Okay.
creates. Yeah.
Yeah.
And that's that so much more so, because it
Yeah.
also you're tied also to like the landscape that the animal has come from, and
Yeah.
there's kind of a heaviness that that comes from taking life and that life then
Right.
becoming yours and sustaining that, and then like
Mhm.
there's uh, something like there's sort of a wrongness to taking an animal's life,
Sure.
but there's sort of like an atonement for that in the um bringing it into your home and like
Right.
especially sharing it with people, your family and stuff like that.
Yeah.
Like yeah, I mean just in the vein of like kind of like weirdly heavy conversation.
Yeah, for sure. Um, so d what was I about to say? Okay, so before we kinda got into all of that, we were talking about your design aesthetics and so the brute de force, and so what are the tools that you have in your shop that you're using? I know I know what I saw, but because and I got a little picture of here from my field trip to Andy Billipp's shop.
Oh, sweet. Look at
Yeah,
that.
is one of them.
Youngsters. That was a
Yeah,
little while ago.
yeah, for sure. And I think this was like right after my kid was born. I was out visiting, and
Yeah.
I came over with Matt Parkinson, which actually is another aspect of get it we should get into.
Yeah, for
But
sure.
in the picture, you're holding one of my knives, and I'm holding one of your knives. And actually, I think
Right.
that was the first time I'd ever seen or held any of your work. And I think, like I said, later that night, we cooked. You like made your own buns, and we made burgers from I think meat that you'd harvested from hunting. I think they were venison or some sort of deer meat of some sort. And
Yeah.
but anyways,
We did get
chopped
to
all
do
this
that
stuff
then.
up.
That's
Yeah.
good.
But what was I saying? Oh,
Uh,
so that like yeah, sorry, go ahead.
Oh, no, I was gonna say, I think you were talking about, like, arriving at an aesthetic or a
Yeah,
style.
arriving at aesthetic and a style and kind of because that's one of the questions that often is asked is like, how do I make my work stand apart from other people's work? How do I also define my own style? And in the past, my answer has just been like, you gotta try a lot of stuff. It's like when painters first start learning, they learn
Right.
from the classical and replicating the classical artists and techniques and stuff like that. And it's through that practice of these various techniques that they start to come into their own style. And so I guess you talked about your inspiration from Taigu. Like, what have been other inspirations um or things that have informed the style of like because I think it's amazing that I haven't seen more of your handle style, and maybe you're more aware of it than I have, but I haven't seen anything that I see that I look at and say, "That looks like Andy Billups' work," but it's not Andy's work.
Oh,
I
yeah.
haven't really seen it, and what's crazy is, like, I've held your knives. I've used them. They're very comfortable. And the handle style and everything aesthetically overall complements, I think, the blades as well, and it all flows really nicely, and so how you, like, came into that and all that.
Yeah, thanks, man. So it was important to me when I was trying to develop a style that I wanted to make something that I hadn't seen before and that I
Sure.
knew that like other people hadn't seen before.
Right.
Um, so like I really liked the aesthetic of Japanese knives, especially
Mhm.
like the karochi finish, like the hand, that's like their cheap knife, That's like
Right.
their like oh, that's just like the bargain bin. You get those ones that we didn't bother finishing, which is like kind of
Yeah.
funny that you make a high
You
end
get a
knife that
discount because we
right
didn't spend as
because
much
we
time working
exactly
on it.
because we just like yeah, didn't even polish this one. But I wanted to, take sort of aspects of that, but then I didn't really like wah handles. Like
Sure.
I knew from using them that they were very comfortable,
Yeah.
and that like I admire the simplicity. It's like there's a sort of like uh, an understated
Mm.
kind of grace almost to like the straight lines and everything on a
Yeah.
Japanese knife, and how
Right.
that they're just like this isn't anything on this that doesn't need to be here.
Right.
Um, and I like that, but at the same time, it's like that's not how you make like high end knives, is by just making them like
Sure.
as simple as a poplar handle or whatever. Um,
Right.
but then I liked ABS style knives or handles. So
Yeah.
like the sort of stacked bolster material, like it would be like a guard with like a couple of spacers and then like an
Mhm.
accent piece. And I liked the pin and I liked the facets on the handles. Like
Yeah.
Nick Wheeler had a like a work in progress thread on Blade forums. It was called like the like stuck in the metal with you or something. Like it was a
Okay.
play on like Steeler's wheel. It was like Wheeler's steel, something like that. But it was
Yeah.
this long thread, and he basically went through all of his like you know the whole knife, every step of it. And what
Oh,
really
wow.
helped me was like the metal finishing on that. It was like that's where I learned about Rhino wet sandpaper,
Sure.
um, which is like I won't work without that stuff.
Yeah.
And then also like all of his tooling for hand finishing on the handles and getting like a flat finish from like
Mhm.
three different materials. Like you have brass in different widths, you have wood, you have like that ABS, like, or like that, like plastic, maybe it's PVC, whatever the spacer material is.
Mhm.
All of those things are sort of like, they're different materials and they're going to react differently. And like to
Probably
be,
like G10. Yeah.
yeah, like,
Yeah.
and then to get all of that to be like perfectly flat so that you can run your finger over it with your eyes closed and not like tell that there's a difference in any of them. All of
Right.
that came from like that thread and his work there. So like
Nice.
I like those style of handles. Um, and so I kind of combined those design aspects. Like I kind of liked the how you have like the flat spine and then the little step up into the wah handle,
Yeah.
and so I carried that over, but made it kind of like what I felt like was more of an ABS style handle with like kind of a palm swell and then a little like little scoop at the end. I don't know, whatever you'd
Right.
call that.
The
Um,
pinky swell.
yeah. And but then I also had this idea that I wanted like yeah, that's an early one. I wanted I wanted my knives to be recognizable in profile. So
Sure.
like if you were to see it in a silhouette, I wanted
Yeah.
them to be like, you could pick that one out, because I felt like a lot of, people making beautiful, like, you know, really well done wah handle knives, that if you just like blacked everything out and saw just like shadows of them, you wouldn't be
For
able to tell
sure.
whose was whose. But I wanted
Right.
mine to be able to like stand out in profile in that
Absolutely.
way, which was just an idea that I had. But like, um, yeah, so that's kind of how I arrived at that. And then as far as like, blade length, shape, all of that. I mean, that kind of stuff like all kind of varies. Like I
Yeah.
don't I don't feel like particularly wedded to any particular style. Sometimes they're taller, sometimes they're not. Like
I see.
there's a bit of push and pull in any project. Like
Yeah, that's
there's kind
interesting.
of what the material wants to do and what you want it to do, and you arrived kind of somewhere in between. Hopefully
Right.
more towards what you want to do.
I've never thought about it from that aspect of just blacking out the blade and just like if you just looked at the profile, if you could tell what knife it was.
Right.
My thing was always like if for whatever reason like somebody's across the room and they're holding a knife, you could glance at it and you would know that it was my work.
Right.
Like that was always my thought. But it's very similar, but obviously different because of the blacking out the profile. But just being like having that recognizability.
Yeah, like you don't want to rely on your maker's mark to have your work identifiable.
Right. Which is
Yeah.
great. Like I love that Nick Wheeler does that. He doesn't mark his work. I think he might have at one point, or maybe he never did, but he doesn't mark his work at all.
Oh, really?
Because
He
he
did in that
wants
work in progress thread, and that was how I did it for a while too. With
yeah.
the before I went to the hot stamp, I had like for a minute there, I was using
Oh, sorry, Nick
the
like
etcher.
Nick Anger.
Oh yeah, yeah,
Or
Nick
not Nick
Anger. Yeah,
Ange. Yeah,
Anjay, right.
he doesn't mark his blades at all. He
Yeah,
just
no, they're completely
because
like
it's like
at a glance, you
I
can
think
tell.
when I've talked to him, he's said that essentially, like, he doesn't care really if people know it's his work or not, because really he's doing the work for himself, and that he approaches knife making definitely more from an artist perspective, um, while obviously still being a very talented crafter. Um, but there's like this feeling, like this almost like a self-indulgent feeling in a way for him, I think, in putting your own name on your work versus like it just being its thing and people either know it or don't.
Yeah,
And
that's like a little punk rock, to be
yeah,
like
for
to
sure.
be like, no, man, I don't even mark it. Like that's how recognizable it is. Cause like, yeah,
Right.
like his style, his like his Damascus work, but also just like, man, the output of that dude blows my mind.
Oh yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
Me
I
too.
met him I
It's like,
met
how
him
the
at a
fuck are you
Hammer
getting all
In.
these knives out, bro?
Right. I met him once at a Hammer In a long time ago. And yeah, I mean, that was like, he was still early on. I think at the time he was doing like stainless clad stuff.
Hmm.
And like even then, it was like he had a particular style, and he was making
Yeah.
just a shitload of knives. The dude's just like
Yeah. At
just
one point,
cranking it.
yeah, he was doing like a knife a day at one point,
That's crazy to me.
which is insane output. But I think it was like he was really kind of like pushing himself again from kind of a more of an artistic point of view of trying to just like really pushing his own creative boundaries to
Right.
just like just blasting out a bunch of shit and seeing what ends up like really sticking with him after all of that hard work in a
Right.
way. Yeah, it's interesting.
Yeah, I've always been jealous of his output.
Me too.
That's impossible not to compare yourself to other people, it's not the point, but, like,
Yeah,
yeah, it's hard when you're seeing, like, "Oh, another one?" Like,
yeah.
"Damn, man, slow down."
Well, and so also something I wanna talk to you about is kind of your kind of I've heard people refer to this transition from the blade to the handle as a semi-integral because it doesn't necessarily flow from the bolster straight into the handle. I would still
Right.
consider this an integral though,
I
because
I call it a sub-integral.
a sub-integral. Interesting. Okay.
Yeah, and I don't know if I heard that somewhere or just made it up, but, like,
Okay.
that was yeah, it's like, some of them, like, some of the Damascus ones, like, I have more
Mhm.
material I can work with there, and
Sure.
they're big, like, they're much bigger than these are, and it gets almost to where it's like an heirloom fit,
Right. I
and
gotcha.
then, I think there's a happy medium in there.
Yeah. And that's actually one of the design features that I always was like interested in because I was like I feel like I still don't really see this. If I've seen it anywhere, it might be actually in Japanese stuff, but that's because they're really driving down the thickness of that bar stock and it does
Right.
end up beefing up that area. And then they're just kind of just letting it be its thing, whatever. And then that flows into the blade. And I think you've made the choice to follow. I don't know like where exactly the inspiration for that comes from, but that I think that is definitely one of those things that really kind of helps your work to stand apart is that it's not a traditional integral or what would be at least right now considered a traditional integral where the bolster of the blade flows straight into the handle material even with an heirloom fit. It's not flat, but it's not like what would be considered a normal integral. But I fucking love it. It's a good look and it's comfortable. I've like I said, held it and used it, and I really am surprised I don't see more people doing it. But I think part of it too, like people just might not know,
Yeah, I
right?
don't know.
From
I
a
mean,
maker perspective,
I feel like it's hard to not end up with that if you start with, like, I don't know what, inch and a half, right?
right?
Bar stock, and then you forge down the bolster and then
Yeah,
into the tang. Like, it's gonna end up like that unless you
yeah,
make it, small. It can be challenging to get it to be thicker than, like, the parent stock, so
sure,
you're actually doing some upsetting, but it's
yeah,
also a place you can add a bunch of character.
yeah,
Um, and I think it feels good. It kind of fills the hand in the pinch grip
yeah,
a little more and adds a little bit of heft to that spot. It also just beefs up that spot, like it's a bolster.
yeah,
Um, and then I think that part of the knife also, like the ricasso area, is like a focal point, just like
yeah,
for your eye. So design wise, like to have,
absolutely.
I think that's like, especially in this because you have like really different. You have a different look for the blade because that's all rough finished, and then you have the handle, which is like not rough at all, right?
Right.
And
Super
I've
refined.
always felt like it's a little bit weird the way the one stops and then the other starts. But then I
Sure.
think there's something about it like getting bigger there that it
Yeah.
makes that less of a jarring transition.
Yeah, yeah. No, I feel that for sure. Yeah, interesting.
But then yeah, and then it also like just it continues the look of the forge finish on the sides
Right.
like up over to the top, which like I've always felt like the forge finish that's then like polished on the top always
Mhm.
seemed a little like I don't know incongruous or something. Like it just
Yeah,
like that always hit my eye in kind of a funny way, and I always
yeah.
wanted the blade to look like it was like completely organic. Like it was some
Right.
kind of like lava formation or like
Yeah.
it like grew out of a tree or something and
Right.
that then you have like the polished metal come out of it that like otherwise it's like like a live edge board like
Right.
with the bark still on it. That was kind of like the thinking behind there.
That's
And
cool.
I kind of like for a while I played with different texturing on the guard to try to
Okay.
like make that transition a little better, but like ultimately I think it just kind of like it worked well enough.
Yeah. No, I think it's great. And I actually what was it at this Winter Strong event, I had some I think it was just 1/4 inch, or it might have been just over a quarter. Um, but yeah, driving it down to kind of isolate the tang material, like the Ricasso and tang material, from what would become the blade. I was actually really, because I hadn't done that. Yeah, I don't think I had done that either before or in a long time, and maybe
Hmm.
had forgotten. And I did it kind of like the old school American Bladesmith Society way, where I just like I hung a portion of what would be the tang area on the anvil, and then just slam it on the spine and shoving
Right.
it down. And that really, yeah, it's amazing how much that upset the material, because you're not going to drive it down all in one, like if you were to use a press or something like that.
Right.
And it upsets, and it's driving at the same time. So, but you're getting that, you're building up that mass from driving that material down. And if I were to use like maybe part like a butcher tool or something like that,
Yeah.
you're not gonna build up that mass the same way. But by driving it down in that way, yeah, I was actually really surprised at how much material ended up there. I was like,
Yeah, it
okay.
all ends up kind of like, so like the bottom part of it where it laid on the anvil, right?
Hmm.
That's where all that material ends up, and it ends up
Yeah,
where like the cross section is kind of like shaped like this, with the
yeah,
bottom wider. So you have to work that in so that you get that width up at the top too,
sure,
like
yeah,
as you're going. So like before you get to the thickness that you're trying to arrive at, you have to move that material like up. So there's a bit of like kind of funny angle hammering. It always feels like, I'm glad there's not like, I'm not doing like a live, like like
sure.
like an Instagram live or something, because like like I don't want anyone to see like how janky like parts of this look, or like how often I drop these things or something like that. Like I don't know if I could ever do like the live forging event thing.
Dude, that's what happened. That was happening at that hammer in, or at the event this last weekend. Like I was forging, me and Jason Knight were there forging. We're trying to like, we're the pros, and we're
Right.
still dropping shit on the
There's
gravel and
like red hot knives cartwheeling through the air.
cartwheeling through. Thankfully, we didn't have any of those, but we definitely had a few falls, or pieces fall to the ground, or just like it looks like crap. For me, like a couple times, I remember saying over the weekend, I was like, "Yeah, for the first like 80% of the knife forging, the blade basically looks like a giant turd." And then in about like the last 5 or 6 heats, all of a sudden, which is like the last half hour or so, all
Right.
of a sudden it looks like a knife.
Right.
It looks
You're like, I
awesome.
swear to God, I'm gonna pull this thing together.
Yeah, but like and part of the reason I was like kind of anticipating or saying that is because I'm looking at the audience and people are watching and they're just kind of like, what the fuck is going on here? Like what
Yeah.
it doesn't look like he knows what he's doing. Like, trust me, I know what I'm
Yeah. It's like
doing. It's just like it'll get there. It
this
just
is
looks
like
like
this
crap.
guy's one of the best in the business, actually. So this is the best we get.
Yeah. Yeah, that's pretty funny. Yeah, it
That's
is. It's
cool.
hard doing that stuff live because you got your own internal dialogue, and then you projecting on other people what they might be thinking or saying
Right.
to
Yeah.
themselves or whispering to each other, and it's like, yeah, it's awkward, but you make it through. I wanted to show you started doing you or not started. I think you did this actually a while ago. But you did this knife that has this. Oh, I don't know if this really shows it for you. Let's see. It's got. I know I have a picture. Oh, here we go. Here it is. Here it is.
Yeah.
So you have like a almost like a split tang, or almost almost kind of like a. Well, actually, why don't I let you describe it? Because I'm trying to like describe it. So tell us what we're looking at here. That's probably the best way to do this.
Um. Yeah. So it's basically like the tang, instead of, obviously instead of going into the wood, is wrapping around it almost like a crab claw or something, like a lobster claw. So
Sure.
so it splits and kind of forks, and it looks like, actually it looks kind of like a meat fork, but like each tine is going on either the top or the bottom of the handle, and the
Right.
top one's like a little longer, and then it's pinned in place with copper rivets. And then this one actually has like a copper accent piece that's between the I think that's actually cocobolo,
Oh,
um,
nice.
or it might have been ironwood. I can't remember.
Yeah.
Yeah, which is fit like into that into that space there. I'm not sure if I
Okay.
did a great job of explaining that for people who aren't looking at this picture.
Yeah, for sure. I mean,
It's you know
if
what it is? It's
yeah, go
like
ahead.
it's just like a keyhole
As I was just about to say.
handle, but minus like the key lock. It's like it's pinned on
Right.
either side.
Yeah, it doesn't have, like, that drilled and then cut. It's just because it's all forged, it does as from profile, it looks like like you said, like a meat or like a roast fork. But
Right.
there's like a long tine and a short tine. The short tine's on the belly, long tine's along the spine, and then, yeah, it's riveted in a couple spots, to keep the handle material kinda locked in and held into place. But I think you did a phenomenal job, um making this piece, and people can see pictures of this on your Instagram, which is Billipp Knives, is that
Yep.
right?
Yeah.
And Billipp is spelled Billipp. Um, and yeah, it's a really cool piece. And
Yeah.
when did
Thanks,
you
man.
build this?
That would have been last winter.
Last
So
and this
around a year ago.
and this one that I have, it's a detail shot of the back of an integral bolster as it flows into the handle. Is this the same? It's part of the same piece, right? Is
Yeah,
it the
that's that
spine
same
side?
knife. Yeah.
Yeah. And so it's interesting because from the profile that we're looking at, I mean, you could see it short of the running the full width of the sides, but I didn't realize like you can see how wide that bolster actually is, which is probably at least a solid like half
Yeah,
inch, 5/8 of
that
an inch.
that one ended up like a real integral.
Yeah. So cool.
Thanks, man. Yeah,
Yeah.
that was a neat project. Like this kind of came out from watching everyone doing not everyone, but like you know the I know you interviewed Lynn Ray, right?
Right. Yeah.
Talking about the X-ray handle. Um
Yeah.
so that design, and then Ben Kamen's done a bunch of he does his monolith knives, which are
Yeah.
like, you know, an all forged like one piece. And you know, I was playing with that idea, like still playing with ideas for like an all, you know, an all metal construction.
Right.
Um, but I wanted to like kind of wrap them around and pin them together.
Sure.
And then I got the idea of like, oh, it'd be cool if you like put the metal inside of that, and then
Hmm.
you know, so then that sort of like led to that, you know.
Yeah.
But just then, you know, playing around with different kinds of construction and stuff, and like, you know, again, just trying to make, you know, something that I felt like I hadn't seen before.
Yeah. So when you're saying put the metal inside of it, you're talking about the metal is like partly recessed. At least what we're
Oh,
looking
sorry,
at.
put the wood inside of it.
Oh, okay. So
Yeah, sorry.
is the metal recessed into the surface of the wood, or is it resting on the surface?
It is resting. It's partly recessed, so like
Okay, cool.
the front
Mhm.
is recessed, so that it kind of gives you a little left and right. Uh,
Yeah,
you know, like locked in there, and
yeah,
then there was another one I did where it was more recessed.
I gotcha.
Yeah, it's tricky to do because you have to completely finish the wood part before you put it together.
Right.
And if you're gonna inlet, I've just thought about this so much because obviously the move with this kind of design is to like inlet it into the wood so
Okay,
that it's sitting down in it, you know?
right.
So that when you look at it, you're like, how the hell did he do this? You know?
Yeah.
That would be cool. I haven't quite figured that out yet.
That
But
sounds
like
very
this
time consuming is what it
well,
sounds
like,
like.
yeah, what
Yeah.
one thing I like about this, I like how that piece of metal, I don't think you could see it in either of these pictures, but it flares out at the end, almost like
Mm,
not like a not like a spoon shape. Yeah, kind of like, yeah, I think the top is like kind of more so, but
okay. This is the belly side then?
right,
Yeah.
like if it's wider on the end than it is on the inside, you're gonna damage the wood as you put it on if
Right,
it's recessed. You know what I
right.
mean? So like that the wood on either space of like where it necks down would get like scratched up by that. I don't know. That's a design
Yeah,
problem. You know, that's my problem basically.
yeah.
Yeah.
No,
But
but it's a cool challenge to set for oneself because it is a very unusual approach, and I could like I'd have to sit and think about it probably at least for a couple days to just try to figure out how I'd even start to think about
yeah,
approaching it.
these kind of things are fun to do, and I plan to do more of this kind of thing. I think there's a lot of room in that
Yeah.
style to play with. Like like I think once you kind of like blow the doors off a bit on your
Yeah.
like construction and stuff, then it's like you're kind of wide open again.
Yeah.
I'm happy with that because I feel like that knife kind of stays within my lane, that's kind of like in my style, but very
Right.
different at the same time. So
Yep.
like that's sort of like you were saying, you have to give yourself permission to like
Yeah.
step out of what you do. And I feel like that's kind of like maybe a compromise.
Yeah. Well, and I think another question I hear a lot is, how do or people will say, I feel like I've plateaued. How do I figure out how to continue to grow or develop new skills? And I'm like, there's so many different ways to make knives. Like, I, I've been doing this for 14 years now at this point. And there's still so much I don't know. And but I think the key isn't to just, I mean, some people might be willing and capable of jumping just completely into a totally different lane.
Right.
But I think small adjustments on what maybe you already do, small design adjustments or techniques that are different, I think those are great ways to start to, like, even like with the handle. Like, I do my faceted handle all the time, but I don't do the stepped facets. And
Right.
so that was a very, like, dipping my toe into starting to develop another new technique or approach without getting too crazy,
Right.
right? And then I went from that to the next handle after that, where like like all three, like all the facets were stepped from each other and running
Right.
down the black and white ebony handle. It was a whole nother step, um, but yeah, you got to start somewhere, and it's better. I think it's better to start small. There's this really great book. What's it called? Oh gosh, it's by Angela Duckworth, and I'm gonna struggle to remember the name of the book, but basically she's talking about how people continue to grow, and progress in their abilities and skills and techniques, but they do them in small steps. Like, I think
Okay.
too often people want to just jump off a cliff instead of like first finding a trail like walks down, and so it's about making those small I'm gonna look
Yeah,
that up
no, that
real
makes
quick.
sense because you don't want to lose your momentum. There's a lot of
Yeah.
value in having momentum in your work, like
Mm,
especially like you're self-employed, you do a creative work,
yeah,
there's like that's like like we were saying earlier, it's like it's a hard thing to maintain and not get burned out on. And then if you
yeah,
are burned out, like doing that work when you just really just would rather be anywhere else is
sure.
like it's tough. I mean, that's a hard job and you make mistakes. And when you're not in it and super focused, then like
Mhm.
you're not doing your best work. um but so you have to have an ability to step out of that, but not without stopping the whole thing. Like if you were
Yeah.
like, all right, screw this, I'm doing like a run of like 200 stock removal knives, and like I'm going to tool up for that, and like that would be like extremely disruptive
Yeah, holy
to
shit.
like to either of us, if we were to try to do that, right? But like
Right.
that's an idea I have all the time. Like I watch people who work in that style. Um,
Mhm.
and I think like, oh man, that would be so cool. Like it'd be so
Yeah.
cool to go in and like turn the machines on and just like run a bunch of stuff, sharp belts through like these set of,
Right.
jigs and stuff like that. Like that seems so satisfying. I don't work in that way at all.
Sure.
It would be cool. Like, seeing people who have like 25 knives that they're, making like this week, these will be up on
Yeah.
my website next week or whatever. Like that's like I'm like that's cool. But then I get the then I tell myself like, well, that's 25 customers. That's 25 individual sales.
Yeah.
And then next week you got to find 25 more. Like it's
Mhm.
just there's a million different ways to do this. And like, I look, there's a kind of a grass is greener thing where I look over at what other people are doing and I'm like, oh, that looks
Oh,
sweet.
yeah, always.
You know, I'm
Well,
also
that's part of
jealous
the
of the fact that,
difficulty of, like, the curated social medias is, like, all the
oh,
grass always
100%.
looks greener.
Right. And I mean, a thing that's appealing about that style of work to me is that people who want your knives can get one.
Yeah.
And that's really cool. Like, a lot of people that, I talk to just outside of this work, but just
Mhm.
like I tell them what I do and they're like, "Oh, this really good. I really want one." I'm like, "No, you don't." They're very expensive.
Yep.
Like I wish
I
that
do the same thing.
all those people like that there was one that they could get. You know what I
Yeah.
mean? Like just cuz like people people like what you do and they want to support you and you want them to be able
Yeah.
to, but like you have to basically be like a patron of the arts here. So like
Yeah.
get into this work.
Yeah.
But it is what it is.
Yeah, I usually with friends like that or people I know who are like, "Oh, I'd love to get hold of your work." I'm like, "You know what? I bet what you got at home is actually pretty good. You just need it sharpened. That's all."
Oh,
And
that's
I
the
often to
yeah.
sharpen people's knives for
There
them.
you go. That's
And
great.
they're
Yeah.
stoked. They like get the knife back and they're like, "Dude, it's so great. I forgot how nice this knife is to use. I did only need it sharpened." I'm like,
Yeah.
"Yeah." But to kinda look at so I did look it up while you were, talking. The book is called Grit, and it's a really great listen.
Oh, I've heard of
Uh,
this. Yeah.
yeah, it's a very and she also has a TED Talk about her name, again, is Angela Duckworth. Uh, it's about grit, and it's just talking about, like, the kind of a growth mindset and how do people continue to, um, develop skills in a meaningful way, and also people willing to, take those like we were talking about at the top of the podcast about being willing to experiment and try new things and giving themselves permission to make mistakes so that they can either learn that something is what they want to do
Right.
because they're good with making those mistakes and see them more as lessons rather than mistakes versus other things when they make a mistake they see them as mistakes and then they're just like feeling cut down every time it happens, right?
Yeah, for sure.
And I think also like Jeff Fader, he comes from an art background, and
Right.
he refers to the evolution of a person's body of work. And when you do like jump off, like if I just like jumped into like a flipper folder kind of style knife,
Right.
I would have a really hard time selling that. I think because it is so far from what I am known for versus it being like a gradual evolution of very small nuanced steps along the way that builds up to that people again going back to like social media and telling a story, it's part of like sharing your path and your journey as you kind of like start to learn and develop those skills so that when you do make that thing then people are like, yeah, they're with you versus jumping straight to it. It's like it's like you're riding an airplane, all of a sudden you kick the door open and you jump out with a parachute and you're like, "Come with me." And they're like,
Yeah.
"Fuck no."
No. But yeah, they're like, "Man, I like the old you better."
Exactly.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think those small steps are really important, but constant like honestly, part of the reason I started doing some of that play with the facets is I love the forging. I love the pattern making. It's always that part is always never gets boring to me because it's constantly challenging. The handle stuff has gotten a little bit boring to me because it's kind of the same recipe over and over
Right.
and over again.
I
Same
mean, that's
same
a space
approach,
of
same
like,
techniques
it's nice to
over
be
and
able to
over.
go into a place that you know.
Yeah.
It's like, you're just alone in your shop, like, you're
Mhm.
looking at the day ahead of you being like, "Okay, like, I gotta
Yeah.
do these things." So, it's nice to know what you're doing, but then at the same time, it's like, you're like, "I'm just doing the same thing again."
Yeah.
So, I mean,
So, yeah, those facets were like a small way of me breaking the wheel of redundant or not necessarily redundancy, but just like the
repetition.
herbal wheel. Yeah.
Yeah.
Just gerbil wheel, running circles nonstop. So it's
Right.
like a way to break that up and try something a little
But,
different,
that
but in a
that
safe
same
way.
thing I think is
Yeah.
experienced by, I mean, whether it's your viewers, whatever your audience, right? Like, I mean,
Yeah.
you especially have an audience, um, and they appreciate it too. I mean, they wanna see
Yeah.
not the same, not like a different color version of exactly the same thing. Like, they wanna
Sure.
see the next thing that blows their mind the way the first one that you did, you
Yeah.
know?
I agree. I get that feedback too, and it feels good, and it feels like I'm making. Like, it helps it feels good to get that feedback and it being positive, but I also gotta remember, like, it's also more important to me it should be more important to me that I feel good about making that and doing those things, and not to get
Yeah,
into it, but, like, these are, like, lessons I'm still learning, and I'm also trying to simultaneously teach my kid at the same time. Because like, when he's
right.
struggling with stuff or is like, there's another kid at school that runs faster than him, so he's like, "I don't even know what the point of running is," and it's like,
Right.
"Bro, his running fast has nothing to do with you.
Yeah,
Nothing. You should run fast as you can because you love it and you're having fun."
for sure. Hey, man, we just hit 2 hours. Can I run to the bathroom real quick
Yeah,
and then
absolutely.
all right.
Yeah.
Gotta make sure to mute this. All right.
Oh, you got a bucket like right there? No, I'm just joking. um, man, this is a great conversation. I'm so thankful to have Andy in here to shoot around these different ideas and conversations and concepts because I don't know. I like for me personally, as much as I've been doing this craft, I don't get to have these conversations very often. Especially with makers who I mean, I get to have them like once a month now. Um, but outside of that, like it's not part of my day-to-day life. And so I hope that everybody listening to this is getting some great value out of it because I think it's important that we all hear these different perspectives and these different takes, whether we agree with them 100% or not. I don't think anybody's ever going to disagree or agree 100%, but it helps us to kind of like think about our own perspective on things and how we approach things. And so I'm really thankful to have people like Andy in here. And after he actually has a hard out at about 11:45. He's got kid pickup. Um, and so we're gonna probably in the next half hour or the rest of the conversation just talk a little bit more about where he's at and kind of other ideas maybe he has going forward and future plans and stuff with his knife making that he wants to do and as well as maybe go through some of these pictures we got here. I mean, we've gone through most of the pictures here. There are a couple of them that I think are pretty cool, especially when it comes to his sheath work. um he's coming back.
I'm back.
Andy's back good. um
What I
yeah.
miss?
No, it's just me being just saying how thankful I am to be able to have these conversations, and while I get to have them like once a month with people whose work, people I respect and appreciate, but also who do work that I respect and appreciate, and is of a level that is inspiring to me, and
Oh, thanks,
and
man.
this being such a solitary job, yeah, absolutely. This being such a solitary job, like we've touched on before, it is again like at least for me to start to feel like I'm on my own or I'm doing it because it is a very solitary job, but
Right.
it's helpful to hear or have these conversations and also to hear other people's conversations around these kind of things. Not necessarily knife making, but just like crafting work and and creative endeavors in general, to realize that like even as much success as somebody's had, they've also had a lot of struggle too, and it helps me uh when I hear these conversations to not feel alone and to feel and not to feel, I guess, by not feeling alone, I feel less defeated by the mistakes that inevitably happen in this process. And but again, it goes back to trying to find work that we're not necessarily excited to make mistakes in, but we're maybe, or willing to make mistakes so that we can transform those mistakes into lessons that we then continue to grow and progress from.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I think that can you still hear me? Are we still good here?
Yes, I got you.
Okay, cool.
Alright.
um, yeah, this is like this is really cool for me. I haven't done this before.
Sure.
Podcast out here on like a totally official one. That's pretty sweet. I like like I was saying, like I listen to a lot of these and like I think a lot of knife makers are this way. That's like they spend a lot of time on headphones, just like consuming audio
Right.
content, whether it's like books on tape or whatever. I've
Yeah.
actually found that like knife making podcasts, since you guys started them, um, have like really helped me stay in the zone in the shop. It's like the perfect thing to
Oh,
listen
interesting.
to. It's like, then going out a day of working out there is like, okay, cool. Like I got a couple of these shows lined up. Like I'm gonna go hang out with my friends. And that's what it feels
Right.
like.
Yeah, yeah.
Um yeah, so it does sort of like make that sort of solitary pursuit more of like a part of a group kind of thing. There really
Mhm.
is a group now though too. Like this is not something I've gotten really involved in, but I mean there's like there's like the maker camp, like there's all these like people
Right.
are getting together. There's this like it really seems like this really strong knife making community that's
Yeah.
come together, and I think that like your guys' shows are like a big part of that. Um
Yeah.
and yeah, it's like it's cool to see. Like I almost kind of feel like I took kind of a break from working for a little while, and definitely a break from like Instagram for like it was like
Yeah.
over a year,
That's
and I
fair.
just wasn't really putting stuff out. And I think like a rumor kind of went around that I had quit, and and then like I kind of got back into it and just like started working again. And it felt like I kind of like poked my head up after being gone for a while. And I was like, look at all this that's going on. Like there's
Yeah.
all people are making all this tooling now. Like there's all these new like belt companies out there, like the
Right.
rise of all of these, it's sort of like, it's a kind of a cottage industry, but like, you have all these, there's abrasive companies, there's all these new suppliers, there's all these new
Mhm.
materials out there. There's so much content. Like the level of everyone's work now is
Yeah.
wild to me.
It is pretty wild, actually.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I mean, this is really, like thanks in large part to you guys and other content creators, like the sort of rise of YouTube, like getting onto YouTube
Mm.
and being like that helped me get so fired up about you know uh, sort of like refocusing on knife work, just seeing what people are doing. There's
Yeah.
like somebody out there forging Damascus out of like a tank barrel from like a blown up Russian tank in Ukraine. I'm
Oh,
like, that
jeez.
is badass. Like, that's incredible. You could just watch that, for 15 minutes while you like eat your cornflakes and then get ready to go out in the shop.
I actually have a picture here of you from, I think, the original post you said, "I'm back!"
Oh,
And it's you grinding
yeah.
on a Santoku.
Yeah. That's probably, I
That
guess
was a
that's sort
fun
of been a
picture.
theme for me, is like dipping out, from time to
Sure.
time and then coming back in.
Yeah, I mean, honestly, you gotta do what's right for you, and I think too many people, and myself included, are a little overly concerned about what other people are gonna think rather than doing what is important for ourselves, whether familiar with our family or mentally or financially, and, you just ultimately gotta do what's right for you.
For
But
sure.
I do love seeing your posts and seeing them when they pop up, and I'm just like, "Yeah, love it. It's so good. So
Oh,
good."
thanks, man. Oh, that
Yeah.
that fires me up. I'll have to do more of it.
Yeah. Well, and so, like, so we were just talking last about this kinda split tang knife that you'd built, and
Yeah.
I'm curious, and you had mentioned that you have other kinda, like, ideas or more of those that you wanna do in the future. So what are some other kinda, like, other ways that you're stepping out from your normal kinda, I wouldn't know, if you would call it, like, your bread and butter, but, like, your
Right.
typical style, and then kind of flexing your creative brain in a way to kind of step outside of your normal here and there. What are some other kind of, yeah, some other
So yeah, I
variations of
I
things that
don't
you'd
have
wanna do in the
anything
future?
like I don't really have anything really on the bench that's like
Sure.
very different. But just yeah, I mean, kind of exploring that style more. I think there's a
Mhm.
lot of like cool stuff you could do with like.
Yeah.
I mean, you're forging. You're not limited.
Right.
You're not limited in the way you are with stock removal or anything like that. So you can really like it's there's not really any boundary to shapes that you can make. I mean, like the Lin Ray's X-ray knife is a great example of that. Like
Sure.
that dude's been making knives forever, and invented a whole new way to make something that
Right.
is like it's been done. It's a blacksmith knife. Like that technique, that idea has been out there since forever,
Right.
but he made it new again in that
Yeah.
way. So like just by completely,
Innovation. Yeah.
yeah, by thinking, apply. I think he was saying that he was applying these blacksmithing processes that he'd learned from outside of knife making,
Mhm.
and then brought them back in, like
Yeah.
ways of sort of like problem solving, and thinking about it sort of like as a puzzle in that way is
Yeah.
interesting. But like I'd like to do some of that stuff. Like I've been playing with ideas for like like an all steel handle. It would have to
Oh,
be
cool.
something that like I felt looked like in the same style of what I
Mhm.
do, but would also have to be like different because a number of people are doing those now and doing really
Sure.
cool ones, so you can't just like rip off somebody else's shit,
For
you know.
sure.
Be like, yeah, I'm gonna do this now.
Yeah.
um yeah, but then the other thing that I've been really interested in recently is like the fine Japanese metalwork that goes into fittings on Japanese swords.
Oh, yeah, sure.
So I've sort of dipped a toe in this. Like last year around this time, I started. a katana project, and I've always wanted to make one. And
Oh,
finally,
wow.
like, so I like bought a bunch of books on Japanese swords. Was like, I'm gonna jump into this. Watched a bunch of YouTube videos on, actual like Japanese masters forging, and then the guys at like Ilya, right?
Yeah.
I can't remember his last name, but the guys over at they were at Man at Arms, and then they moved over to a different channel.
Yeah, I think it's, Ilya Alexei,
Yeah,
something like
like
that.
watching his stuff there is like very well made, videos that showed that process. But like
Yeah.
the old style of forge welding, like
Oh,
I
yeah, sure.
learned to make Damascus and do all of my like pattern welding stuff dry, all through like
Oh,
reduced atmosphere, so
yeah.
like I came in right when that, like I remember when JD Smith taught that at the Dragon Breath Forge
Right.
Hammering, and that was like I watched him do that, and then I went and made Damascus because like that was kind of what I needed to like take that step.
Mhm. Yeah.
um but that was like at the time that technique was becoming more widespread. Before that, it was like there were all these like there was the like forge welding relish or whatever, like people had these
Right.
different like mixes of for fluxes and stuff like that, and kerosene was popular as well.
Forge welding relish.
There was like yeah, I don't
Oh
know,
my
maybe that was
god.
just
Yeah,
like
I mean, I know exactly what you're talking about,
that
but
might have been a
god, it's so
northeastern
funny.
thing. There was something about like, yeah, like a heat treating sauce or something. I don't know. But yeah, but so I was interested in that, in like flux welding and the way
Yeah,
that they could take just like pieces of metal that are like half full of dirt, practically, and
sure.
just refine it and work it down, and so I was able to. I didn't start with like Tamahagane, but I
Mhm.
made like a pattern welded billet, did all of the all the folding and everything. So like,
Yeah.
using water to knock the scale off, and like
Oh, wow, cool.
doing, all that wet forging stuff, and then like the wet welding where you're using flux, and then just like, and so I made the sword with the soft core, and like, all those steps. um Yeah, speaking of embracing failure, I did break the first one, which
Oh, sweet.
Matt Parkinson helped me heat treat it, and then he was like, and then I ended up redoing it at my shop, and then I broke it in exactly the way that he said, like, not to break it. He's like, "Don't
Okay.
bend it now," and I did, and then it broke. So
Oh,
I had to
shit.
make another one. I haven't finished that project, so I've gotten hung up on that in all of the fittings. And that was
Okay.
kind of like, there were two things I wanted to learn from that project, and why I kind of like let myself do it, thinking about it in terms of like
Mm,
kind of like
okay.
professional development.
Yeah,
Was one was that those welding techniques, right?
yeah,
Where you can just kind of like stick anything together and make it
yeah.
work. Um, and then all the really fine work. So like a number of years ago, there was a popular video by Ford Hollom called
Okay.
oh, I can't remember what it was called. It was like it, it was a this very beautifully shot video of him making like a copy of an old
Oh,
Suba,
with
which is
with,
the
like, the tiger on it?
yeah, I
Yeah,
think
I
it might
saw
be
that
called,
one.
I think it's called Utsushi, and like somebody's tiger. So he's copying the work of an old master, right?
Right.
And so found that guy's work, and like, it's impossible not to be super inspired by that video. Like if anybody's listening to this that hasn't seen this, like go look at Ford Hollom's work. You can find this video. Um, but it's, he starts with like a picture of this thing, and
Right.
he has like so it would be part of a set. So like a short sword and a long sword, and he has like one of them, and he has pictures of the other one, and this like, some his patron or whoever is like having him make the new one, and
Yeah.
he makes the metal. He like, it's the right combination of copper and
Oh, right.
silver and gold, and he like, pours all that out. He starts with this ingot, and then he's just working on it, and his like shop is just, I don't know where he is, like South Africa or someplace. It's beautiful, it's
Yeah.
like with lights coming in, and he's sitting there working, and like everything's laid out perfectly, the kind of
Mhm.
thing that makes you just like, oh man, I got to get in the shop. Like that looks awesome.
Yeah.
And so that video takes you through, it's all this like the whole process, and it's this really fine work done with tiny chisels,
Mhm.
where he's like, he builds this space up off of this copper plate basically by
Yeah.
adding like inlaying extra pieces, and then like I mean, it's completely insane how detailed it is. It's like he's adding whiskers on this
Well,
cat's face that's like
in the
this big
depth,
with gold. It's
yeah,
wild.
the depth he accomplished, like, he creates this incredible sense of depth for something that isn't very thick.
Right.
I mean, he's building layers up and adding materials to it, but it's not super thick, and
Right.
it makes it look like it's fully 3D, like, it's fucking insane.
Right, well, it is too because it's both sides, you know? So,
Right.
like, that he has to take, an image and make it work on, when you flip it over,
Yeah.
even though it's flat, so, like, the cross section is only that, that thick, but then you flip
Right.
it over and the depth works in both ways. So, like, yeah, just mastery, in every direction. But that kind of thing seems like, I love the idea, the combination of that kind of work and the forge finish,
Yeah.
so I think that they're um th- that type of engraving, like, done with very fine hammers, as a in the Japanese style, as
Mhm.
maybe opposed to, like, the, I don't know if you'd call it Western. Like, I don't know much about it because I haven't really looked into that kind of
Sure.
stuff, but the kind of engraving that they do on, like, on nice shotguns and, that kind of
Right,
stuff.
right. Yeah.
um it seems like there's a lot of work, or a lot of room to work in there. So, like, I started
Mhm.
studying Japanese, the suba, the hand guards for Japanese swords,
Yeah.
and that in itself is fascinating because the amount of texture and everything like that, like,
Mhm.
that's in them. Some of them are perfectly finished and immaculate, like the one that we're talking about in that video, and
Yeah.
other ones, there's this real embracing of, like, of textured, like, weathered metal and, like, iron. That's like, generally when you find an iron suba, it's like it's deeply pitted and all this kind of stuff, and not
Right.
just because it's an antique, but because, like, it was sort of intentionally made that way. So
Right.
I just recognize some of the aesthetic that I already kind of work in, like, a lot of those pieces, and started thinking, like, oh, there's a lot of room to play with if I can get enough skill with, like, the,
Yeah.
chisel and hammer work to be able to, like, start doing the things that I want to do. I haven't built the skill yet to do that,
Yeah.
so that's kind of something I'm working on here and there, but I don't have anything of that to, like, I don't have much to show for it yet.
I got you. Yeah, I've made I had an old custom order that originally the guy wanted a chef's knife, and then he wanted a a Bowie knife, but he didn't want a Bowie knife. He actually wanted like a tanto, or what he was calling a tanto. And so I ended up making a tanto, but in my style and the way I make. So I didn't do like even a traditional like habaki. I did an
Mhm.
integral habaki. Um, and so I left the area a bit thicker and then sculpted the material down to look like a habaki, but it's
Oh,
actually
cool.
integral to the blade. And then when I did the suba, there's usually, at least from what I could see, there's usually a spacer and then the suba and then another spacer on the backside before
Right.
the handle. And so I made the top spacer and the suba actually integral to each other. And then upset the edge to get that raised lip around the edge,
Mhm.
and then I fire etched. And so I made it out of Damascus so that I could fire etch it to create that intentional, like, topographical
Sure.
texture, but it's because it's layered steel rather than carving anything in. And aesthetically, like, it ended up looking really cool. And I have an idea for how to use that in other kind of pieces of hardware. Um, and that I'm excited to try to put to use. But these are like, I have like little journals full of all these different
Right.
ideas and notebooks all over the place, and I start to fear like I'm never going to be able to get to any of these things. I know I won't be able to get to all of them, and so I'm starting to prioritize which ones I'm really interested in trying to attempt.
Sure.
But I almost have too many ideas, but I can understand where you're coming from and the appreciation for the construction of those style of tools and weapons, because they are surprisingly intricate. And you're right.
Yeah.
The video is called Utsushi, which is basically the word sushi with ut at the front of it, and it says in search of Katsuhira's tiger.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah,
and it's
that's
a like a
an
3 or
amazing
more part.
video.
Yeah, if you just search, I just Google searched Ford Hallam, Hallam, tiger suba, which is spelled Tsuba, and it came right up. first things that came up in the video search.
Yeah, so that guy has a ton of YouTube content,
Yeah,
instructional stuff. You can basically
it's so
take a
good.
class with him by, he does like YouTube classes, be like, all right, we're
Oh
all
well,
going to start with this gauge piece of copper. And then, he takes you through all the process of like
yeah.
whether you're inlaying. He has like a ginkgo leaf inlay. So that's like
Oh
a,
yeah, I've seen
a
that
sort
one.
of like classic motif, right? And
Hmm.
so there's one that you can learn to do that. So I've been kind of working through some of those and with mixed
Oh,
success.
cool. Yeah, 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 yeah.
It's like a real departure from anything I'm used to doing, but it's fun. I feel like the possibilities there are,
I love it.
pretty interesting.
Very
How
nice.
about you? Like, I mean, anything
Like side
continuation.
projects?
Yeah, side projects. I mean, I know you say you have like a lot of ideas and stuff like that, but like earlier we were talking about how like you can kind of jump, you can take small jumps off of, your sort of like main
Sure.
lane, right? Like you have like the sort of like new details in your handle sculpting, right? I
Yeah.
mean, like, do you have ideas that are like that, but a lot more? Like, do you
Uh,
have any ideas that are like, I don't know if this actually fits what I do, but like maybe I can make it connect?
I have a large camp knife, like a recurve Bowie knife, camp knife style knife with an integral guard on it that I forged when I was still in Connecticut, actually. So it's like 5
Okay.
or 6 years old, and it's just been laying around the shop. And I've been really wanting to finish that, but I forged it in a way so that it will have a mix of the brute to forge aesthetic on the blade, but because it's integral, it'll also have an integral guard, but then also still have some of the forge aesthetic still in the guard, but then a clean blade. And then I do have some concepts around doing kind of like those stepped carvings into more of a like a ABS Bowie handle style.
Okay.
And that's one that I don't know where that's gonna go or when that's gonna happen. But yeah, it's at the shop and I look at it every once in a while and I draw ideas, but I'm just kind of like flipping around and thinking about it and stuff like that. I have another one I have that I need to probably start working on soon is it's a Bob Lovelace replica, but it's made out of stainless mosaic Damascus that I forged with Will Brigham, who's based out of Orange County or Huntington Beach,
So is that like a
California.
drop point hunter?
It's I don't know if it's a weird style that he only did 100 of, I think. And I have one of the, a friend actually gifted me um the one of the 100. It's like number 69 or something like that,
Okay.
and he gave it to me as a gift to give to my kid, actually, as like to start his knife collection.
Oh wow.
And
Starting
so
it off with a Loveless.
yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And so
You're like, it's all
I
downhill from here, kid.
no, sorry, bud. And so I'm building a replica of that knife uh to actually give back to my buddy as a gift, but
Oh,
out of
cool.
mosaic stainless Damascus.
Oh, badass.
And so I think that'll be a really cool one. I'm trying to right now. I'm trying to figure out a way to attach the handle in a way because because it's mosaic Damascus. There's tons of great pattern, and Loveless is a full tang knife with a guard
Right.
and all that. So it's a integral guard and with an integral tang and full tang and
Do they
blade.
have a tapered tang usually?
Yeah, they do.
Okay.
So that'll also add to the trickiness.
Yeah.
Excuse me. And so uh I'm trying to figure out how to attach the tang or the handles though, because I want it to look like if Bob Lovelace had made it, but how to build it in a way that you can take the handle scales off and see the pattern underneath the tang or underneath the handle scales. So still
Oh,
make
okay.
it build it as a takedown. And the easy answer would just to be like, to do like a Torx a nut and bolt set,
Yeah, but then
but
it doesn't
that
have
would
the
it
Loveless
doesn't
fasteners.
exactly.
Yeah.
And so I'm still trying to figure that out. Um, I have a couple concepts of how to make it work, but I haven't really 100% nailed it down. And that's really what's been holding me back on finishing it. But I can at least start the finish grinding and stuff like that and doing all the bolster and guard sculpting
Right.
and the blade tapering. But Yeah. So that's
Sweet.
another one. I have a couple sword projects I'm working on too, which are replicas of ancient Roman swords that
Oh,
had
yeah, that's
mos
right. I wanted to ask you about that.
they had mosaic patterning in them, and so I'm working
Yeah,
on
you're
building
doing
those
like
replicas.
sort of like historical interpretation kind of work. Like you're doing like
It's called I learned that it's called
experimental
experimental
archaeology, right?
archaeology, yeah.
Right. Okay.
And so it's yeah, by doing my best to replicate would have work that, was done 2000 years ago, but unfortunately nobody actually knows exactly how it was done except for
Right.
those ancient people because it was an oral tradition. It was nothing none of it was written down anywhere. And so how exactly it was done isn't known. Yeah, so I'm doing my best to interpret how those patterns were made first off, like the pattern elements, and then how they're then added to the overall construction of a blade to then make a sword length blade with all these mosaic elements welded into them and all that.
Right.
So I think I've figured most of that out. It's just a matter of now building those swords. But ideally, the goal, I would love to get paid. Ideally, it'd be great to get paid for all this work.
Yeah.
But ultimately, what I want to end up with is a piece or two in some of the museums because museums, as far as I can tell, especially with like what I've seen at the Met, is like the Ulfbert sword. They have a replica
Right.
of the Ulfbert right next to a real Ulfbert, so
Right.
you can kind of get an idea of what a one looked like brand new versus the actual thing, what it looks like now. And so, and then other than that, I have a bunch of teaching stuff I'm doing. I'm gonna be in Arizona, and then I'm doing a private lesson in Sacramento, and then I'm gonna actually be over in Indiana teaching at the Coal Iron School. I'm gonna be at Maker Camp. Gosh, I know there's other stuff that I'm forgetting. Like I said, I'm gonna be down in Arizona at the Desert Metal Craft School. God damn it. I know there's something else, and I'm totally forgetting it right now.
It's
Oh,
all
I'm
right.
gonna be I'm gonna be in Minneapolis in August at their Hammer in there.
Oh, cool.
Um, and so yeah, it's I got a busy year doing again
How
mixing it up with the knife making and
right.
doing other stuff.
How do you like traveling for all of these events? Like what I mean, you kind of have like a life like you're kind of on the road, right? Like a
Yeah.
performer, you know?
Yeah, I'll be on the road at least once a month for 9 months of the year this year.
Okay. So how long is it usually? I assume it's a
It's usually
weekend, right?
yeah, like this last weekend was 3 days, but like some of them will be at least a week, if not 2 weeks, depending on what it
Right.
is exactly. And so, yeah, it's you gotta find that balance with the family, and
For
it's
sure.
hard. It's hard to be away because it's extra work on my wife, to have to do the kid full time as well as working her own job. And so, yeah, I don't know. We'll see how this year goes because I may last year I think I did like 2 or 3 engagements, where I was traveling and teaching or doing hammer-ins or whatever. And this year, like I said, I got like 9 different things going on,
Right.
and we'll see if I've overextended myself.
Right.
And if I'm already like wondering if that's the case, and and maybe yeah, at least making some adjustments for next year, or I'm thinking about maybe doing an on year and off year, like teaching 1 year and then taking time on, like not teaching, just so it's not like so much
For sure.
travel every year,
Do you
and
do
then
you
limiting it to like maybe one thing a quarter instead of
right.
9
I
things,
mean,
doing like
all of
yeah,
all of that is time. Obviously, you're not in the shop, which is
yeah,
good and bad because, like, we've had conversations in the past about how like just being a knife maker, as in like your work every day is I just go in and make knives. It's like it's just not sustainable.
sure.
It's not sustainable
Yeah,
physically or like mentally. That kind of
right,
stuff. Especially like if you're working, not in a sort of like batch process of production, but more in like almost like an art piece way.
right.
Um, that so I mean that obviously gives you some break from just being in the shop all the time. But do you find it hard to get back to work when you've been like how do you balance like those two aspects of
Yeah.
what you do?
Sometimes when I get back, I am just like zapped.
Right.
and like it takes either from a day or two to like a week to really get back into a flow. But then there are other times where I'm like fully energized and I get right back into the shop because I've had that time away. And it really comes down to where I'm at, like mentally or stress wise. If I'm feeling overwhelmed from where I'm coming back from and worn
Yeah.
out, then yeah, it takes longer. But otherwise, if I'm like, you know, reinvigorated, because it can be, I have a tendency to be more extroverted often. Though as I get older, I definitely have my moments where I'm like, I need to be alone for a while. Please. Thank
Yeah.
you, everybody. Um, and so so I do well. I go out and I do these things, and they are revitalizing and energizing in a way. And I'll come back from like I'll go visit my buddy Neil in Hawaii, and mostly we're just like hanging out, and we're not really doing a lot of work. But when I come back, I'm like I'm inspired to like get back after it because like somebody like him, like we were talking about before, is like he's one of those guys that's like blasting out like 5 6 knives a week,
Yeah, he has a pretty
and
high production.
he's doing a great job. Yeah, he's doing really high production. He's doing good work, and he's got a style of his own, and he's definitely inspiration. But yeah, and so when I come back from his place, I'm just like, yeah, let's do it. Let's get after it.
Yeah.
Or like when I go down to Arizona next month for the Hammer-In, like seeing all these makers and seeing all the different talents and skills they're bringing in, sharing. I know I'm going to get stuff there, pick things up that I'm going to bring back and want to try to employ or start to like kind of conceptualize and build ideas and projects around for the future. Even just forging with Jason Knight, he and I have been friends for a long time. I'm very familiar with his work, but I've never actually seen him forge. And so seeing him forge,
Right.
there were definitely a couple things that I picked up um, that that I hadn't like he does these clip point recurve knives, whether they're small knives or big knives, and I'd
Right.
never seen him forge it. Actually, I've never seen anybody forge them, and so I just like when I forge them, when I've done a couple in the past, I'm just kind of like guessing or how
Right.
I would approach based on what I know and understand about forging. And so seeing him do it, I was like, oh, that totally makes sense. And there were a couple things that I did that he was like, I've never seen that, but I like that. And he started doing it too. So there was like an exchange of ideas and techniques. And he's been making knives for almost 30 years now at this point. And so that's pretty humbling to have somebody
Oh yeah. I mean,
be like, dig
Jason
that.
Knight's the real deal.
Yeah, for sure. So, but man, I know you got a heart out. You in about 10 minutes, a little under,
Yeah,
and
probably about 10 minutes more. Yeah.
and but I just want to thank you again for coming in here and hanging out and chatting with me and sharing your take and your story, honestly, on about where you came from and how you got into knife making and what have been your inspirations and where your path is kind of like looking like going forward. And like I said, I've always really admired your approach and your technique and your aesthetic and just everything about your work. And so it's good for me personally. I really appreciate understanding the person behind the work. And so I appreciate you taking the time to sit down with me and just share that part of yourself.
Oh man, I appreciate it so much too, and it's an opportunity, to like, have some other people see my stuff or whatever, and certainly appreciate that. Um, I gotta say, man, like everything that you're doing says so much about your character.
Mm,
Like, all right, so like you were on the Rogan show, right? Like
right.
famously, and that was were you still in Connecticut then?
Yeah,
Or
I
had you
just
just moved?
moved. We had
Oh, yeah,
just
that's
moved to
right, because he was
Connecticut.
talking shit about Connecticut on that show.
I can't yeah, man, I
But,
can't
like
remember you saying.
so, like yeah, so that dropped, like, at that time, I was listening to that show a lot, like, I
Yeah.
had, found it, like, the year before or whatever, so I was like, I when a new one came out, I would be like, "Whatever," and Your Name came up, and it was like I was so psyched, dude, like, you know that scene in Goodfellas? I think it's Goodfellas when have you seen this movie?
I've seen it, yeah.
Yeah, when Ray Liotta's in the shower and he finds out about the heist that Jimmy's pulled off, and he's in
Okay.
the shower and he's banging on the wall. He's like, "Jimmy!" because he's hearing it
Yeah.
on the radio. That was me. Like, I was like, "There
Yeah,
I
oh,
go! What the fuck?"
that
I was so psyched. Oh man, it's so cool.
Yeah.
But
Oh, that
anyway,
was a
you get
great
this huge
opportunity.
exposure, right?
Sure.
And then it's like, what do you do? Now you have all these eyes, right? And it's
Yeah.
like you could go for the, license. I don't know what opportunities are available to somebody who all of a sudden has the amount of exposure you do, because it's not like you can just like sell 150 knives. You're still
Right.
limited in the way that you make them. So it's like,
Yeah.
what do you do with it, right? And what you've done is like you've created content that has done nothing but help people. So like you
Mm.
have this big exposure, and then you are like, the sort of like the tide that all raises all the other ships.
Mm.
And like you've consistently taken like these opportunities and this platform that you've created to just like help people. Like you're helping me right
Sure.
now, to like, creating, you're sharing, you know secrets, things you worked really hard that you could just like hold to yourself, and you're just giving them away.
Yeah.
Like, it just says so much about what a good dude you are. And
I appreciate it.
I really appreciate you having me on here. It's really fun to talk to
Yeah.
you. I mean, we haven't talked in a long time. I feel like the last time we talked, you were on my podcast, when I had a podcast
Oh,
like
right.
5 years ago or something
Yeah.
like that. And we did one at Dragon's Breath Forge
Right.
with Matt Parkinson
Yeah.
and Eric Kirsch. And yeah, I don't know what happened with that. I think we had some audio issues,
There's the
and
audio
we were
issue
drinking
somewhere.
some beer. I don't know. It was a little aimless. I don't really know what I was doing with that project, but I'm really glad this one is like this one is succeeding, and you're doing everything you're doing. It's like
Yeah,
really awesome to see.
I I really appreciate it, and I'm trying, and honestly, there are definitely days where it feels like more of a struggle. Every like, it often feels like more of a struggle than easy, but I'm still trying to get in here and do what I can to help and to share, and I think I what is it? I read Ryan Holiday wrote a book called "The Obstacle Is the Way," and he talks about all these and he's like a Stoic he has a philosophy background, and he's all about the Stoics. And one of the Stoic tenets um, is to kind of take a moment and in a somewhat meditative way reflect on yourself as though you had died. Like, what does it look like on your deathbed? What have you done? What have you
Right.
contributed? And then and who have you helped? Who have you hurt? All that kind of stuff. And then um and then I kind of and then I guess after that, then sit in the realization that the longevity of our lives is not guaranteed.
Mm,
Ever. We could go unfortunately, and it happens every day, like, people suddenly get in car accidents, gone. Stuff happens, and shit happens, and you're just gone, and so, in my head, I'm like, "What good is what especially around, like, the Damascus stuff, like, the way I've started to really realize, especially in the last 4 or 5 years, like, the way I think about steel making or pattern making is very different and unusual, and what good is any of that if it's still in here and I disappear and I'm gone from the earth? And like we were saying earlier, like I'm talking to my kid and he's feeling like sad and upset, like he's not the fastest kid on the playground or something like that. And it's like the reality is like what that other person is doing has nothing to do with you. It doesn't take away from you and your enjoyment. And I realizing like, and I used to get a lot of trouble for or guff or like people you would give me a hard time for sharing as much as I share. And the reality is like, it's not hurting me. And honestly, it's not hurting you. And if anything I can share, or as simple or as complicated of a thing that I might be talking about that helps people to break through to the next level, if it inspires people through the work that I'm doing to pursue this craft and maybe realize like this is their calling, or maybe it's not. Like also through doing the work and realizing, oh, I thought this might be my calling, but it's not, it's something else. And then they can take the step to then move on to the continue on their journey to try to of discovery of whatever that personal genius is of theirs.
right.
And it's just, it I don't see I guess I just don't see the use of keeping things to myself when honestly, like the awareness that I've built around the work that I do has all come from me sharing.
Right.
Like I've only become better known or built more reputation and I guess um trust and respect from people through sharing what I do and my approach and my process. Because like from a customer aspect, like I'm helping to them to better understand what they're looking at so that they can make a better formed decision. I almost said incision. Better formed
They might
informed
make that too.
decision. Yeah, right. And whether or not they're buying my work or somebody else's, they have a better idea of what they're looking at. And then from the other side of from the maker aspect, it was helping makers to better refine the work that they were creating and putting out into the world and sharing with people. And I was like, I have no problem with that.
You're like,
And if
these are all good things.
yeah, I was like, that was it. It was like, what's
Right.
wrong with that? Our lives are so like we delude ourselves into thinking sometimes, especially when we're young, we're gonna live forever.
Right.
And some people, even when they get older, they think that it's like, no, we're not. But what are we leaving behind? What are we leaving behind?
Right.
And what we leave behind, the help, the love, the care, the support, inspiration, we leave all that behind to carry on for others to carry on and pursue as well as to do themselves. And so
Yeah.
yeah.
Well, I mean, you've had this opportunity which you've taken and ran with, obviously, to like, to make the circles that you can influence wider and wider,
Mm,
in the way that you have, in the thing that you have to offer, in the way that
yeah.
you're excellent. You have excellence in this way and in this field, and that like that is affecting, because of the work that you're doing, like the content that you create, these rings that go out wider and wider. So like,
Yeah.
yeah, that's a great thing to put your time to doing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, man. Thank you. I appreciate it. Appreciate your kind words. I appreciate your time. I know you gotta get going. I appreciate all of our sponsors again, really quick. We got Dan Hubbs of 66 Mountain Knives. We got Lawrence Lake of Maritime Knife Supply, Gabe Fletcher, Anchorage Forge, Eric Kidwell at District 202 LLC, Josh Weston, Josh A. Weston, as well as the Dragon Forge EXP. And we also have finally Russell Tinsley of Oozles Finch Beers and at Can't Make Knives. Andy, which everybody can find online on Instagram at Billipp Knives. Is there an underscore or is it just straight Andy
No,
at Billipp
Billup
Knives? So
knives. Yeah,
BILLIPP Knives. And you got a website, I believe is billippknives.com.
that's right.
And that's the best place to find you, connect with you, see your work, get inspired, or buy some stuff.
Yeah.
Andy's a great guy. And
I
I
sell I sell my work on Instagram right now
okay,
as it becomes available. So I moved away from custom work,
great.
and so basically I make
Sure.
things and post them there for sale.
Good deal. That's a good approach. So, all right. Thank you, everybody. Thank you, Andy. And everybody stay safe, stay sharp, and let the people you love know you love 'em.